feel like it's appropriate that I am literally double fisting today. Because it's Romania Black and we have a movie to watch today. We have the Revolutionary Girl Utena movie and I have a feeling I'm going to be very glad to be done with the manga before the comments for everything else comes in. So I can read that on my own time. I mean, obviously I want to have a live stream to talk about Utena in May at some point. So I say May because that starts my summer schedule and I have more time. I like doing summer live stream series because I have a lot more time to play with when I can devote to the live streams for a couple hours, and my schedule opens up to do more reaction recordings. So there's all that fun stuff. And I don't want to wait too long. I know I do a lot in June and July for the live streams, but I don't wait too long to talk about Utena because I want to definitely talk about it and kind of like be able to do what we have. Although, as I'm recording this, there's already the series that's going to replace this series been decided, so that's going to be excited to dive in as well. But I've got a lot of comments I want to talk about. Last week was just Romania in a very bad mood, and I didn't expect to be that way. I don't like, if I'm feeling like I'm in a bad mood, I usually won't record something. I'm like, no, it's not the time. And but the last week that I recorded, I felt fine when I started, and then I read the comments and I just had this just like, I don't know what it was. I just felt bad. And I was like, ugh. And I thought, okay, I'll be fine. I'll get over it. And it just carried, I think my disappointment with the episode 39 kind of did not lend itself to help with that attitude. And I was kind of disappointed last week. And I'm excited about this movie because it's an hour and a half. I'm assuming it's not a straight up recap movie because you all know how much I hate straight up recap movies. So hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully it adds different things to it. And it also says Adolescence of Utena. So I'm thinking, is this Anthy going to find Utena? Is this Utena reflecting on everything? I have no clue what to expect out of this movie. And everybody has been super awesome about not spoiling the movie, or those that have tried to spoil me have been stopped by the moderators. So I feel good going into this movie knowing I know nothing about what to expect. So that's really exciting. That's very exciting. But I want to talk about comments. Just a couple comments. There were some really good ones that came out that did not trigger me this last week. And I did have some things I want to talk about. So just in general, I went back through episode 39 to kind of maybe re-articulate my feelings about it. I was just disappointed in the reaction itself. And then I record my discussion immediately following that. So I was like, probably not in the most acute headspace. I think one thing that did disappoint me by the end of the series was that we'd kind of built up over the course of it this big discussion and symbolism involving the constellations, the mythology, the surrealism of it. And then once you find out that Akio doesn't like the stars and it was all bullshit, and that it's all an illusion, quote unquote, it just kind of stops being talked about and stops being referenced, and it just drastically took away from the magic of the series and the tie-in to mythology. I was expecting like a big giant connection with the Gemini and the constellations and everything, and it just kind of got dropped. It just kind of, the series just kind of like and did that with it and been like, never mind. And I was like, oh, that seems like such a there were a lot of missed opportunities with episode 39 that I was disappointed with because I expected more. And I expected better, I guess. I had a higher standard for it than what it gave. With the student council, going back to that scene, Toga and Sayonji seem to be friends again, which is great. But Nanami bothered me because she wasn't able to go off and do her own thing. She just is relegated to serving her brother, but without the creepy romantic obsession. It's like, where was her apology? And I know I'm asking for a lot, apparently, with that. But what about her being her own person? What about her competing with him and being better than him? Her subserviently sitting serving tea doesn't really give that illusion that after that duel, she was going to get to be her own person. It just kind of is like, nope, we're back in the time loop and she's serving him again and she's beneath him again. It was not jiving with me at all. Now, Juri has her own harem now, and Mickey made a male friend. So cool! But I guess them all just forgetting about Utena and staying within Akio's world was just sort of a letdown for me, especially with the anticipation and expectations that I had. I was expecting a lot more. And I think the big thing was that Akio didn't face any responsibility or repercussions for his actions. I mean, sure, Anthy left him, but he's still in charge of the school. He can still be a predator and manipulate and possibly sexually assault others in the school with the power that he still has. So just because Anthy's left him, and sure, that's a key component of his control that he's lost, how is that stopping him from doing this again? It's not, really. I mean, you can make other people the Rose Bride. We've seen it all throughout the series. So yeah, that was a big disappointment for me. And if for some reason Anthy leaving deletes his ability to create a Rose Bride, the show needed to be a little bit more explicit with that, I think, to drive home the impact of her leaving. If her leaving crumbled the academy and broke the time loop and destroyed everything, they kind of needed to show that. So otherwise, how are we supposed to know that, right? How are we supposed to know? So Utena was the one that, despite how she was, was not supposed to be a prince and Anthy was supposed to save herself, it was Utena's love and devotion that reached Anthy, which is great. I loved that about it. It just kind of sucks that Utena was punished essentially for it. And only after the fact did Anthy realize that she was able to save herself, which, it kind of, as far as character development, it just read a little hollow. It was like, we've not given you a lot with Anthy, but you're supposed to feel really, really for her at the end. And I do feel for her, but there was just so much opportunity lost and so much potential that they could have done in this series that I kept on kind of maybe crossing my fingers would happen. And then when it didn't, I was like, oh, okay. It reminds me, I guess we don't know about the movie and the manga yet, but it kind of reminded me of another series that I watched, which was Slam Dunk. So episode 37 had all this setup. Episode 37 is one of my favorite episodes in the whole series. All this promise and setup for episodes 38 and 39. And to me, it just didn't quite deliver what it promised to pay off. It mostly was doing a lot of things for the sake of being surprising and abstract and tying to a psychology theory you can find in a textbook. But it sort of killed my emotional investment, especially as it kind of punishes Utena for her bravery and love rather than reward her for it, which I guess the reward is that Anthy gets out, but Anthy could have gotten out the entire time, It's like, oh, you love Anthy, well, joke's on you, now you get to get hurt and wait for Anthy to come find you. So maybe in 10 years. Congrats. And I'm sure Utena will be fine with it because she loves her, but for us, the audience, it's like, oh, okay. I would have loved for Anthy to have reined in her power as the witch, to have struck at Akio and took that power back for herself, but they just reserved that. But that would have taken away from her leaving, and I get it. It's just, I would have rather had her kind of do a double whammy and embrace the power of the witch and then leave to kind of put the nail in the coffin of him, but the show just didn't do it. I guess for me, before we get to these comments, I sort of feel the same way about Utena as I do with Slam Dunk. And without spoiling Slam Dunk, because it's an old basketball series, the beginning of Slam Dunk, the setup of the characters and the story are so masterful and they're so good, and I love it. The third act of Slam Dunk, doesn't hit for me. And I feel like Slam Dunk as a whole is a foundational series for its genre. It opens a lot of doors for other sports anime that came after it. And a lot of the sports anime that came after it did aspects of Slam Dunk better, like Haikyuu, like Ace of the Diamond, like Kuroko's Basketball. They all take cues from Slam Dunk and then find its pitfalls and then strengthen it in their own narratives, which is great. That's what you do. You have foundational works and then people draw from it and they improve upon it with what the authors of that time couldn't know what to do or weren't able to because of societal barriers. And so I get that. And so I kind of view Revolutionary Girl Utena sort of the same way. It's a great foundational series. And it opens a lot of doors that needed to be opened in terms of narrative and understanding sexual assault and embracing the idea that these men are predators and they need to be addressed as such. But as of the series itself, I can't speak for the movie yet, it just doesn't nail that final conclusion landing to me, and it leaves a lot to be desired. And I feel like, as I've talked about, other series that have drawn inspiration from Utena have done it better because they've figured that out and were able to do it, whereas Utena wasn't aware that they could do these other things, or they didn't do it and these other series did it instead. So that's just my thought right now. it may change. I may soften on that as we go. As I reflect or as I read the manga that's on my shelf, I may go back through the manga and then, change my mind about things. I'm human. I'm allowed to do that. So yeah. I did want to note that with episode 34, Jer Jr. 3951 said, something that I've noticed since your reaction to the Black Rose arc is that there isn't a corrupted or evil counterpart of the prince, different from the princess. And I came to the following conclusion. It is not uncommon when a man is evil or abusive. Some people end up saying he's not a man, he's a child, or he's not a real man, almost emasculating the man and, even without thinking, upholding the idea that man is inherently good. In the case of an evil woman, most of the time they don't call her a child or not a woman. In Revolutionary Girl Utena, then, a girl or princess can always act on her own and corrupt herself, becoming a witch. And a boy or man does not fulfill the role of a prince, they're not a man at all. They don't even exist. This made me see the male characters of Revolutionary Girl Utena in a different light, but not Akio, though. Yeah, I would argue, my only argument to that and counter to that would be that in a lot of things they call him a monster. A monster would be what they would call, but I think calling a male character when they do something horrible a demon or a monster is kind of the anime equivalent of that. Instead of a witch, it's a demon or a monster. I've seen women in anime called demons as well, but monster seems to be the equivalent. But in Revolutionary Girl Utena specifically, I do agree with you that they don't give any of the male characters that monster equivalent. They just say, well, you're either a man or you're not a man. But you are very correct in that they portray men as being like good. And if you're not that, then you're just not that. But then women have a lot more subsets that they can kind of be categorized as. And I'm sure that that's Ikuhara making a point of that that's how that's viewed in society. And so I think that that's really good that you pointed it out through your comment here. I think that was really, really well done. I'm glad that made me think about it. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a really good point to bring up. El Freya, for episode 37, says, I think you can relate the end of Aladdin, Disney's Aladdin, very strongly to this episode. Anthy is the genie here. Just say the word and you're a prince again. And Utena is playing Aladdin. But Genie, what about your freedom? Genie says, hey, it's only eternity of servitude. This is love. Only Akio is absolutely nothing like Jasmine. And Genie says, and Aladdin says, Genie, I wish for your freedom. Oh, and then Genie, you're free. I liked that a lot. My only thing is I don't ship Aladdin and Genie. So if you're equating Anthy and Utena to that, does that mean that we don't ship Anthy and Utena? It's not a perfect metaphor. It's not a perfect comparison, but I definitely think that Anthy is like, oh, I can, you can be a prince, but I'm still going to stay the same if you're a prince. And that's kind of the point. Anthy is saying you can be a prince, but that's not going to free me. That's not going to free me. But then again, if we're talking about Anthy saving herself, that can't happen, because I don't know if I like the idea that Utena has to wish for her freedom for her to have the opportunity to free herself rather than just her doing it. So again, it's not a perfect comparison, but I get what you're saying. So I thought that was a decent one to bring up, Elfreya. Oliver Jajado gave the commentary for episode 37, and I went ahead because as I'm recording this, episode 38 is just coming out on Patreon and episode 37 is coming out on YouTube. I wanted to go ahead and look at the other commentaries for 38 and 39 before we start this. When I was looking for the commentary for 38 and 39, I did notice there was a movie commentary, but I don't know. I might save that for the discussion, and I might also save it for next week with the manga. So we'll just wait and see on that. We'll see if I remember. But Oliver Jajado says, for episode 37, before the commentary, I'd like to emphasize that while Ikuhara is the director of the show, he's less of a writer or animator and more like an eccentric artist who throws ideas and concepts at the canvas and lets his screenwriters do the detailed work to see what actually ends up sticking. When you're looking for a definitive word of God, Ikuhara is the last man you should trust, just like his friend Hideaki Anno. Although I will say I'd probably trust Anno more because Anno, I think, has had more of a tie to the screenwriting and the creation of it. That's just my opinion. Just going to say that there. There are several interviews over the years you can read where he and his writers express differing views on themes or characters, and it's also very apparent that his opinions on all of his shows have evolved and changed during that time as well. His chief screenwriter for Utena was Yoji Inokido, who he knew from working together on Sailor Moon. Inokido has written the script for Fooly Cooly. Well, that makes a lot of sense. A few episodes of Evangelion. And he's done the series composition and script for the anime adaptations of Ouran High School Host Club and Bungo Stray Dogs. Well, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good comparison. I guess that makes a lot of sense. And that might be the problem in a nutshell, is that you don't have a cohesive writer, screenwriter, creative, or an artist that are all on the same page and in agreement with what should happen. If there are differing views of concepts and characters, then what you might end up with is something that's maybe less cohesive and perhaps more artistic, perhaps more stylistically bold and innovative, but whether or not it lands the mark because it's not a cohesive, focused piece could be called into question. So that makes a lot more sense, especially in the last couple of episodes when you're trying to tie all the loose threads together and not everybody might be on the same page. That might be, I definitely can see that. So I'm glad you brought that up. The episode 37 commentary is about the origin of engagement rings and Cantarella. Episode 37, the one who brings the world revolution. Evidently, some theorize that engagement rings can be traced all the way back to ancient Rome in the days before Christ. At the time, of course, marriage wasn't a product of love, it was a political affair in a society dominated by men. The concept of romantic love appeared on the historical stage later. Therefore, rings weren't proof of love, they were only signified proof of contract, which ties to this whole series. During the Renaissance, military man Caesar Borgia was ablaze with the ambition to conquer Italy. One theory has it that Borgia family assassinated its political enemies with a poison called Cantarella to expand their territory of influence. I've known the words Cantarella for some time, but I didn't start to think of it as romantic until I read Miss Saito's manga, The Flower Crown Madonna. You see, Caesar has a beautiful younger sister named Lucrezia. In this story, Lucrezia entered politically expedient marriages with men of various lands, and her husbands died of mysterious illnesses. She poisoned them with Cantarella. Lucrezia loved Caesar as a woman loves a man. For her brother's dream of world conquest, she married men who she didn't care for, and then she killed them. Lucrezia gave both body and soul out of love for her brother. What a romantic story. That's what I thought on the first reading. I also thought I want to take a shot at grappling with her emotions. I think that I had Lucrezia in the back of my mind as I shaped Anthy's personality. Okay. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Again, would have liked more character development on Anthy, just saying. But that makes a lot of sense if you're going to compare those stories of them. Interesting. So as far as the commentary for episode 38, episode 38's commentary was really short. It was the end of the world. There's one thing I remain strongly conscious of since we were producing the opening sequence, and that was the final duel. When the prince awakened, the dueling arena tower would crumble. Right before the series began its broadcast run, we were producing a promotional TV spot, and so I was thinking up the narration for it. I'm going to be a prince. I had a premonition. I knew that line must have meaning. I guess that also goes with understanding why perhaps the screenwriting and the narration isn't as tightly focused as I personally would like, and that's because you're starting with an image rather than the story. And it depends on the writing process. I like to write, and I've wrote for years, and I usually think of, sometimes you think of a scene and a story, and then you write it out to get what that looks like. And there's different ways to do it, but if you started out with, here's what I want as an image, and then you create the story around it, that's a different process with a different result than coming up with the story first and then crafting the images after. So interesting indeed. And then there is the commentary for episode 39, which makes up because it's a longer commentary. Someday together we'll shine. There are two meanings to the Japanese word utena. One is the calyx of a flower. That's also the meaning of the title, of course. The thing that supports the beautiful petals, the one with the noble heart. And the other meaning of utena is the tall tower or pedestal. We translated this into a visual. The tower at the center of Otari Academy, the one with the chairman's room on the top floor, and the dueling arena located deep in the woods is the same. Is it located deep in the woods? Because you said it was an illusion. In the early stages of production, when the story wasn't firmly established yet, this was one of the aspects I wanted to visualize and produce for the screen. a world where demons roam. In its center, a tower called the Tower of Revolution. Whosoever can remain victorious in battles against the demons can reach the pinnacle of the Tower of Revolution, and at the same time receive the power to revolutionize the world, the power that changes the rules of the world. However, when he reaches the pinnacle, he learns the world's governing laws. I like that he uses the he pronoun in this. Interesting. He faces the ultimate choice. Will he stay nobly and beautifully powerless? Or will he accept ugliness into himself and gain absolute power? He desired both, or perhaps he couldn't choose either. In his mind, with anguish, he divided himself in two, his noble heart and the adult with absolute power. And so, with one last wish that the day would come when someone would awaken him, the noble heart that had lost its body, in other words, the prince, they fell into a deep sleep. Early on in the series' conception, I kicked around the idea of placing something like the above at the heart of the story. Later, after several changes, it became the tale as you know it, but without a doubt, he did reach the pinnacle of the Tower of Revolution. It was a place where eternity dwelled, and eternity turned out to mean perpetual sleep. The prince, Akio, who became an adult while in perpetual sleep, lost something. What he lost was the power to create an enjoyable future. Revolution means gaining the power to imagine the future. The prince chose to sleep on, and the princess chose to wake up. At the top of that tall tower, the princess bid farewell to the prince. No, she wasn't the princess any longer. She quit being a person or thing ruled by someone. The victory bells rang, and there was no tower or rule beyond them now. She learned where freedom lay. She crossed the threshold at the door of revolution, which had always been closed for her before, and began walking. The girl's revolution lay in the girl's future. Wait for me, Utena. The world, the stage, is free and wide. That's nice. I definitely understand that. I get that that's what it is. We've talked in previous episodes about the contradiction of having things be grounded in such realism with complex characters, with nuanced character development. But then towards the end, we fall back on this very simplistic kind of base symbolism storytelling. And to find the balance between that, to me, is very difficult to do. And I think that the last couple of episodes lean more towards that base symbolism that we've seen in other stories. No offense, I've seen it in other stories. Whether it was Japanese media or English literature or whatever, we've seen this happen. Or I've read it. So I was like, okay, cool. But I talked about it last week. I prefer the complex realism than we're going to transform a children's fairy tale into something adult. I don't know. It's personal taste. It's personal preference. If you like the way that episodes 37 through 39 ended, I don't think you're a bad person. I don't, think that you're wrong for thinking that. And I just wanted more. And I don't think it's necessarily bad all the way, but I really had some high expectations and lots of complex things that could happen in these final episodes. And then it stuck to a more simple way to tie it all up. And I was like, oh, cool. I was like, you do you, show. So, but I'm not going to take anything away if you liked the ending of it. And hopefully you all didn't take that away from last week. I was frustrated for myself because I know so many people love this show as their favorite anime. And I want to love it that much with you. And the fact that I couldn't was making me go insane. And I was like, all right. So is what it is. But we'll see how this movie goes. Maybe this movie will change my mind. Maybe I'll like this movie more than the last episode, We don't know yet. I know that when I watched Puella Magi Madoka Magica, there was a movie that came after the final episode, and some people like where the anime ends, and some people likes the movie, and I like the movie. So maybe we'll have that kind of situation happen again. But I've talked for nearly 25 minutes, so thank you for sticking with me if you've stuck around this long. I appreciate that. Through my difficulties. But we're going to get started and check out and see how this goes about with the movie. And we're going to start this sucker, the Revolutionary Girl Utena movie. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's see what happens. Well, so, I'm you. I kind of loved that. It took me a while to get into it in the reaction, because in the reaction, I was honestly, at the very beginning, I was confused because a part of me had not put together that in this timeline, Utena and Toga were friends and had known each other past the coffin incident, and that Akio had not made any impact on her as of yet. So, and my dog, of course, as soon as I sit down to record this, is like, here's your toy. And I'm like, great, cool. But I had not made that connection, and so I was confused the first 30 minutes about whether or not this was Utena coming back to find Anthy after she'd healed up. She cut her hair in an act of defiance, came back to find Anthy, and then once Anthy showed up, I was like, well, that can't be it because Anthy left. So what do we do about that? And then with the whole thing with Toga, when they first had that conversation at the not birdcage, I was like, well, is this... I had thought maybe the bird cage was destroyed and Akio had destroyed it and kind of went into a rampage after Anthy left and had just, there were a lot of things that the beginning of this movie led me to believe that this was Utena coming back, and Utena was privy to the idea that the time loop was going on and everything was repeating itself and the school had just changed to match the revolution and all that. And so I was a little confused because I was like, why is Utena forgetting these things that she knows from the series? And once you figure out that this is an alternate timeline and it's an alternate telling of the story and we're going back from the beginning and Anthy's different and Akio's different, because Akio having a different voice actor is a stroke of genius. Maybe it's the same voice actor. He sounds completely different. So that leads me to believe it's a different voice actor. Once you figure that out, the story is very different. And I kind of, with the exception of there's no Mikage in this storyline, which I was sad about, no Mikage. Sad days. With the exception of no Mikage and no Ruka, who are two characters I really liked from the series and I really thought were powerful characters, with the exception of them not being in this movie, which, sad days, I liked this version better. For a lot of reasons, mainly because of Anthy. Mainly because of Anthy is the reason I like this version better. And it took me a moment, because this film is very sexual and very explicit in your face sexual. There are parts of this movie where the symbolism is subtle and you're like, oh, and then there's part of the movie that you're like, we are not being subtle at all, are we? No, we are not. It's like, if you didn't get the series, you're definitely going to get the movie, and then they become cars. This is the Disney Pixar Cars crossover that I didn't know I needed. I wonder, oh my God, did the creators of Pixar, because I know that John Lasseter is a big Ghibli fan, did they watch Revolutionary Girl Utena, the creators of Cars, and go, wait a minute. Also, this movie came out in 1999, so party like it's 99, folks. We're going to party like it's 99 and talk about this film. Honestly, and I say this, the animation of the 80s and 90s with anime is gorgeous, but the animation in this movie is some of the most beautiful animation I've seen in a long time with a movie. There were some parts of this movie that the animation and the way that it was drawn was gorgeous. And there were some times that I was like, is this gonna be style over substance? But it was not. And we need to talk about it. So I'm ready to talk about this. Now, I did find, I'm going to link it down in the descriptions below so that you all can access it as well as we go along. It's from this otari.nu. Apparently, according to Papas, there's a Geo's note. The Central Park Media release of the Utena movie included a director's commentary audio track with subtitles. Ikuhara is not being interviewed, but rather is just discussing things as he watches them, like a commentary, like what I'm doing. I've parsed it out in paragraph form, roughly broken into scenes and subject, and my italics are scene or character cues that are not obvious by what Ikuhara is saying alone. Enjoy. Thank you from the mouth of babes. Thank you for doing this and putting this together, because I kind of want to go through each scene with you all and talk about this because I think it's cool to get Ikuhara's commentary as we go through the movie. This is awesome. I love this. So he says, hello, I'm Kunihiko Ikuhara, director of Revolutionary Girl Utena. I'm here to talk about some behind the scenes stories about the making of this film. Oh, I can't wait to hear what he says about some parts of this film because, whoo! Okay, so we don't get our first talk from him until the bell sequence where it zooms out and the opening titles. So we're going to wait on that. Utena with short hair, love. Does it make any damn sense with her gaining long hair, short hair, back and forth? No. But I feel like with this film, you have to suspend all disbelief. It is fantastical and surreal and magical. And it also wants to become Neon Genesis Evangelion at times. And I'm like, okay. So I feel like you have to suspend your disbelief. There are maybe only a couple of things that I will critique about this movie that I was like, we didn't need that. And you all know about, I'm sure you know the one thing that I'm like, we didn't need that I'm going to talk about ahead of time. You already know it's coming. We're not there yet, but you know it's coming because in the reaction I was like, but why? So maybe Ikuhara will have commentary about it. I'm really hoping that he does and he doesn't just gloss over, so we'll see. But there were some things you kind of had to just be like, let it go. And Utena's hair getting long and short, you just gotta let it go. It's like, it's fine. Does it have any logic to it? No. Is it just purely symbolic of representing her and her true self and her being a lesbian and being free? Sure. Okay. And because we see her from going, the one thing I like about this movie is with Utena's sexuality and her discussion of how gender reflects the way that she dresses and her appearance. I do like this movie for the fact, even though it doesn't logically get explained, it is what it is. It's a fantastical world, and they establish that within the first 5 minutes. The fact that she has such stark contrast from her being like the page boy haircut with I love the suits. I love the upgrade on the suits where the black and white stripes and then Toga's in all black. I love it. It's so good. And even Jury's suit design. Mickey got a whole damn glow up. Talk about that. That's another scene that I was like, why? But we'll get to it. But I did like the contrast of Utena in their like kind of masculine presenting when they joined the school. It's a different style than what it was at the start of the series. So I was like, okay, cool. And I like it. I think it ties back to her flashback with Toga. And also I kind of like that it's a little bit subverting and kind of like a nod to being like, it's okay, Toga. I'm not going to grow my hair out either. I'm going to keep it short, like you weren't able to do because of your creepy ass foster dad. But I liked that. And then it contrasted with her showing her femininity when like the suit was open and then when she was with Anthy and kind of revealed herself. So that's something that I want to talk about right off the bat. I've got the movie versus the show here. And a lot of this was Utena's appearance tied to her gender normativity in relation to the show. Versus the movie, what they end up doing with it is kind of that, but in another sense, it shows that her femininity is actually connected to her connection to Anthy. Her connection to Anthy and her discussion of her sexuality. Which, honestly, I will tell you all, as you've probably guessed from the discussions, I am not a lesbian. I am not attracted to women. So I can't speak to that angle. And I'm sure people in the comments can in much better detail. But to me, from having friends that are attracted to women, I definitely have had conversations with them where they've talked about how, there is a pressure of society to say, oh, well, you're the masculine one, you're the feminine one. And that it can be very frustrating if you are someone because you're like, well, maybe attracting this woman kind of subverts that notion of society anyway. So why does there have to be a butch lesbian and a not butch lesbian, So one thing I really appreciate about this show and what it does is that when Utena shows her true form, her sexuality to Anthy in this film, she has the long hair represented, and she wears the shorter, more feminine boy shorts, and she shows her femininity more, but it's not her femininity for the sake of a man and not for the sake of the sexual gaze from a male perspective. It's her showing her femininity and that she loves Anthy and being her true self in front of Anthy. Whereas from the beginning of this film, she's more closed off around people like Wakaba. Whereas when she's around Wakaba, it's like, and people she doesn't know, she's kind of hiding that who she really is. And it's made a lot more apparent in the movie, which again, there are parts of this movie that I feel like it's the creators going, oh, did you not pick that up from the first go round? Well, we're going to make it even more obvious for you so that you don't get confused again. And I was like, okay. But I think I like the style of it. I like what it says here. I feel like one of my criticisms of the show was that there wasn't enough conversation about sexuality. There was lots of conversation about sexuality between characters like Juri and Ruka and Shiori, which Shiori being the secret antagonist of this film was insanity. But anyway, we'll talk about that. But I guess because Ruka wasn't here, she had to go get with Toga, I guess, which we'll talk about that in more detail. But I feel like while the series had lots of moments that focused on sexuality between Ruka and Shiori and Yuri and Juri, and then you had obviously Toga and Akio and all of that mess, there was discussion of sexuality when it came between Utena and Akio and Anthy and Akio, but between Utena and Anthy themselves, there wasn't a lot of discussion of sexuality. If it's like, yes, they care about each other, yes, they're soulmates, but the discussion of their sexual preferences and who they are attracted to, I always felt going through the series, I kept waiting for them to talk about more. And here in the movie, at first I had some issues with it because I was like, oh wait, because I had some issues with it, but that was because I was confused on what track and what route we were going on. And then once we established what we were doing, I was like, oh, okay. Well, now it's a whole different story. So I want to go through that now that I've had a chance to kind of talk about it. The chalkboards, the sci-fi elements, everything about this was so well done. I loved the chalkboards. I loved the sci-fi supernatural elements. I loved the moving parts. It feels very Puella Magi Madoka Magica, which I was like, ooh, inspiration. It was so cool. I loved it all, like floating in and out. This is probably around the time that I don't really want to bring up Harry Potter because I don't like J.K. Rowling at all. But I will say that since I grew up with that series, that imagery is stuck in my head. The changing staircases and all of that is imagery that the first book would have came around 1999. So who influenced who is the better question, right? But I love the moving staircase and all the parts and pieces. One thing that's interesting is that we have a couple differences. So in the show, Otari Academy, in the series, it is this kind of posh, realistic school. In the movie, it is a sci-fi nightmare. It is sci-fi and surreal and very just stylistic. Like, do things make sense like having 50 chalkboards in front of a schoolroom? No, it does not make sense at all. Is it just stylistic to be stylistic? Yes, it is. But I'm kind of here for it. I'm kind of here for the weirdness. I'm fine with that. I think that's fun and creative. So here's my thing. If you establish from the beginning that this is going to be bonkers town and weird, if you establish that from the start and that is our expectation, then you can go balls to the walls and do whatever. So if you establish like this crazy warped up surreal academy that makes no sense with things that make no sense, by the time you get around to Utena turning into a car, you're kind of already used to it. And so you're like, okay. But I think because the academy in the show is so realistic that when you find out that a lot of the surreal elements and the magic, they say they're illusions, but they're not illusions. It's kind of like, well, you need to make up your mind. And I feel like this movie made up its mind within the first 5 minutes that, yes, we are going to go into Bonkers Town. I hope you're ready. And I'm like, cool. I also like the idea that the Shadow Girls, their names are Eco and Fco. All right. They, in the show, are performing a play as actresses, right? Here, we've gone a step beyond. They've already graduated from their acting school. They went and got their BFA, and now they're on a radio show. And we find out later on that Eco and Fco are actually alternate versions of Utena and Anthy. And I kind of love that, because I love the idea that the shadow girls from the season are other versions of Anthy and Utena. I kind of love that. I was like, yes, if the cycle went on, these are just, and when we got to the control tower where they were all like controlling the cars and everything, I was like, are these all alternate versions of Utena and Anthy that are going to be in other timelines? They kind of are. And I kind of love that. It's great. But yeah, their whole duty is to bring the mid-morning show. And so we see Wakaba's showing Utena around. We see her showing the Onion Knight around at the very end of the series. And she's kind of just showing them around. And I just love how poised Utena looks at the start of this. And I think that poise that Utena had from the start, kind of like not in the show, Utena from the start kind of has this like cocky, arrogant, like, yeah, I'm going to be a prince and all this kind of attitude about her. And that's because she's met Akio in the flashback and all that. In this timeline, because she's met Toga in the flashback, and I think that's important to note, the influence of Utena. So Utena, I'm going to put her over here. In Utena, and my dog crashed against my raccoon. In the show, Utena had been filled with despair and had been influenced by Akio, but did not know Akio or Toga or Saionji, presumably. She was just this lonely girl who decided to become a prince after the fact, and that was that. And that kind of enforced her decisions and how she acted and regarded herself. Here, in the movie, we actually have an established relationship where her and Toga are childhood friends, where Toga is the one that comforted her at the coffin. But not only that, he was the one that became childhood friends with her. Seemingly, in this timeline, Toga did not stay on the bicycle with Saionji. Toga got off the bicycle and went and actually got the gall to talk to Utena and become friends with her. And then he died! And then he died saving a girl, which is who Jury talked about in the story. So we're going to go back to that, which I'm like, is that why at the very end of the episode when Saionji looks over at Toga, it was Toga the whole time? Is that what this is? Okay. So he died saving a girl, and then he came back and kind of pulled a Ruka. He came back to be the movie's timeline version of Ruka. Only instead of for Jury, it was for Utena. And I guess Utena's bisexual in this encounter. I guess. I think that's fine. She can be bisexual. That's cool. Good for her. So, yeah. I guess I liked the fact that Utena was influenced more by her relationship with someone she lost. And it influenced her acting the way she does. She seemed more poised and more confident at the beginning. And that poise and confidence she shows at the beginning made me think that she had came back to find Anthy after being away and healing and learning all that she had from the season. But nope, this is just a different timeline. So she's like, oh, I'll just invite you. Sometimes there's a shower. The forecasts say nothing about that, which the shower is the rose petals that come down that we'll see later on, which is fun. They say the rain in my heart will cloud the skies above, which is literally talking about Anthy and the rose petals and how her heart was stabbed by Akio. So they're like, what's wrong with me anyway? And so they're like, everyone, I love that ripple effect. If you plan on scribbling on your boyfriend's back while he's napping, make sure he doesn't have to swim in phys ed the next day. So weird. But yeah, I really love it. I love that this world is kind of deconstructed. And I guess you could also point to the fact that since Akio is not really present in this world, he doesn't have like a hand on everything. Everything's not under his control. And there is kind of a more surreal, dreamlike quality about it because it's tied more to Anthy, which is interesting. I just thought it was very interesting. Also, and she's like the high school building. And then we see Jury and Mickey, the prince and them battling. I love that the entire fencing arena is completely different. It's been completely deconstructed. So in this deconstruction, it's like, I guess we do have the moving walkways. We have a lot of stuff that I was thinking of the bells happening later on, but it's already happened. We're going to go back to that in a hot second. But the fencing arena, I'll stop after talking about it here and go back to the commentary. I love that in the show, the fencing arena where we have jury at is on, like, it's in a pit with kind of a walkway above. And here it's the fencing arena is out in the open. So it's like the movie saying, we're not even trying to hide the symbolism. We're going to come out straight out and say it. And Mickey's glow up. Mickey with longer hair, shaggy hair. Yes, please. I love that. I love Mickey's gotten taller too. Hell yes. I'm all about that. So let's go back to Ikuhara's commentary where we had the bell sequence with the zoom out. First, I'd like to talk about this prologue scene. As I recall, this was actually quite a tricky scene to put together, in particular this cut. The cut was edited using digital techniques and the camera work was quite complicated. I realized that the animator in charge of this sequence hadn't done it by the deadline. So I quickly remember rushing about to direct the camera work for it myself. I recall that this sequence was quite a tricky task given the very complicated camera work. I really want to say that anything digital added to this show, you can't tell. It's seamless, and I love that about it. As for the opening titles, these opening titles, as I recall, were also quite difficult to produce. These aren't simply subtitles, they were actually created through digital graphics. We used a supercomputer that we have in Japan that is capable of nonlinear digital editing. Now, this was something back in the day, right? Now we'd just be like, oh, digital editing, we do that all the time. But 1999, that's pretty advanced. We created these through nonlinear composite editing. This was a quite difficult process. Nonlinear compositing editing is a technology that's similar to digital video editing, where the composite images are created from a digital data using a PC. Not only do you have to have a good editor, you also need a computer and software that can perform that task. As such, I remember this being quite a tricky process. Which, yeah, it's so funny to look back and think of the technology then and go, oh wow, we've come a long way. But back then it was a big deal. So the opening scene, it's set in a classroom. This is the first scene in the film. I felt it was important to set the proper tone and to convey to the audience that this is a strange world. Yes! So we got all our staff together for a meeting to talk about the ways we could do this. And we decided on this idea of a multi-directional backboards. Yes! So again, they set up from the start. They're like, this is weird. It's going to get crazy. I hope you've strapped in and you're ready to go. And I'm like, as long as the story will tell me from the get-go that it's going to be weird, I'm up for anything that it gives me. I'm like, okay, you're going to give me Bonkers Town. We're going to go to Bonkers Town. Okay. So with the view of the school and moving walkways, this scene as well, we use the same technique that was used in the prologue scene. We felt this scene would set the tone and mood of the film. I think this strange scene underscores the strange mood of this film. I think this scene sets the unusual tone of the film. You know, it's just like, I'm just saying, like, I'm just giving you a heads up. It's going to be an acid trip. I hope you're ready. So Utaba and Utena, Utaba is their couple name. Utena and Wakaba walking around. We have this exuberant young girl appear from the outset, but we thought about presenting her in a different way than what you see in the TV series. We thought that it would be necessary to have some sort of running commentary on what's going on concerning the Shadow Play girls. So we thought that we'd make it a live broadcast and have the girls talk as if they were in front of a microphone. Okay, so the scene where Juri and Mickey are fencing. You see a lot of scenes like this in the TV series, so we thought maybe there should be something like this in the film as well. Perhaps you can tell if you've been watching this so far, but we put a lot of emphasis on the artwork. I think there are lots of visuals up to this point that have an impact from a visual art point of view. Actually, at least up until this point in the film, we put a lot of focus on the background art. Yeah, I think that is one thing about this series, and I say style over substance, and what I mean by that is I'm not meaning that in a bad way necessarily, but when you talk about elements of fiction, and I've mentioned this in the previous episode, there are different elements that lots of creators focus on. Some people focus on character-driven films and character-driven stories, which are my favorite. Some focus on the plot elements and like the world building and things like that, and that's fine. I would say 86, for example, is a series that focuses a lot on the plot and the world building. And then you have series that are very much focused on theme, which is just the purpose of it, why it's there, and on style, which is how it's presented. Theme and style kind of go hand in hand sometimes, and then style is how it is presented. And so you could look at two very different series, like, for example, Skip and Loafer. The style is very simple. It's very realistic, grounded in realism. It's a simple style. You don't really think much of the style in Skip and Loafer because that's not why you're watching it. You're watching it for the character and the plot, right? And the theme. But with Revolutionary Girl Utena, style is at the forefront. It is like essential. Symbolism, style, and theme are the three main elements that it focuses on. And I love symbolism, style, and theme. I prefer character development to be above those three, but with Revolutionary Girl Utena, I don't think that's the case. I think it's all about the artisticness, the theme, the style, the symbolism, and then the character work comes after the fact. Not to say that it doesn't come in a abundance, but it's not the central focus. I think that Ikuhara is more concerned with the themes he's purporting and the way that it looks necessarily than the character development. And I mean that in the best way, but I think that that is definitely the case. But like the mosaics were all, one thing I love about this series is everybody's watching everything. So something that was really cool was that during the duels, like everyone is watching. Everyone sees, except for the Utena and Saionji one, which that was just, you know, to establish some things. But in the show, the duels are all only Akio's chosen. So only the ones that Akio deems are worthy to see the duels that he can control are allowed to see them. But yeah, Mickey is so fine. So fine that he blows our mind. Hey, Mickey. I love that this series, the animators were like, let's just give everybody long hair. Let's just do long, extravagant hair, except for Wakaba and Utena when she's hiding her hair. And like Juri gets the long locks. She keeps the ones curly so you can tell it's Juri. And then Mickey grows his hair out. Toga has his hair and Saionji has his hair. Utena's hair or Anthy's hair is down instead of up. Like the only one that doesn't get the hairdo is freaking Nanami. Which honestly though, here's the thing. It hit me. I was like, we're not getting Nanami in this episode. But we don't get Nanami in this episode. You know why? Because Toga died. So because Toga died, there is no Nanami. There is no Nanami because there is no Toga. He's a freaking Casper the Friendly Ghost. So she's just there as a cow because they're like, well, I guess I'll put Nanami in and this is really funny. But also, I'm glad Nanami is not in here in hindsight. At first I was like, oh no, that's all we see of Nanami. She's just in cow form. That's sad. After the dad scene, the foster dad scene, which we're going to talk about, and I'm going to be curious if there's commentary on that, I didn't want to see Nanami present because I didn't want Nanami to be in that environment. We just watched her go through that in the series. I didn't want to see her tuck up in that again. So yeah, so there's the concept of the prince. I'm going to put this over here. There's the concept of the prince and being, which we'll talk about, and Juri is considered a prince, and Saionji considers himself a prince, and Utena considers herself a prince at some point. I don't know about Mickey, but we'll talk about Mickey. But yeah, they're talking about them being popular and all that fun stuff. And then they're just Juri, Senpai, and Mickey after all. And she has her locket, bringing open that fencing outfit. I just can't believe Mickey's gotten so much taller. Look at him. He looks great. And then Wakaba was like, well, maybe that'll be your rival, which that was kind of Shiori's plan, but it didn't exactly work out. And then Mickey-kun. Kaoru Mickey-kun. Yeah. I love it. He looks so crazy. And that's when she looks up and sees Toga in the all black. Now, at first, I was really confused because when Utena looks up and sees Toga, I was confused because I had in my mind that Utena was coming back. This was still the same timeline. The world had just reshifted because of the revolution, and that she was looking for Anthy to save her without knowing that Anthy left. And so I was really confused. And so when she saw Toga for the first time, I immediately thought back to her thinking of Toga after episode 36, where they had those moments, right, on looking at the stars. And then when she talks to him for the first time, they kind of mentioned the stars for a second, or the last time they met up, and I was like, oh, episode 36. So this means she knows. And then it hadn't hit me that, no, we're in an alternate timeline. This is not a sequel. This is not her coming back. This is a whole different start. But she knew Toga from when they were kids, and that's why she reacts the way that she does to him. And I was like, oh, okay. So, yeah. But we're going to go to that, because that explains why she has like the soft googly eyes, because I'm like, aren't you supposed to be in love with Anthy? But we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're not to her being in love with Anthy yet. So they say his twin sister gets in the way, so he can't get a girlfriend because of her. Well, it almost feels like Mickey and Kozu. I feel like Mickey and Kozu are kind of the surrogates in a weird way to this relationship. It's like Mickey and Kozu are kind of like, what if Toga and Nanami had the relationship that Toga thought Nanami wanted, is kind of what they end up at in a way, right? So yeah, and then she's like, okay, I see this person that I've seen in the past. So, and Wakaba's like, where'd you go? Then we have the no longer birdcage and all of the red roses in the center. I love it. I love the imagery. The fact that there is no birdcage, because there is no Akio. Akio is just a construct of the prince. He's not an actual figure controlling Anthy. So essentially, let's talk about this. I mean, Akio is in the film. He is. He's there. But Akio is kind of a ghost himself. He's a ghost. He's a construct. He's an illusion that is just trying to trap Anthy in that world. Whereas in the show, Akio is an actual person. And we ought to address the elephant in the room now, because we're going to get to that scene later with him date raping her with the drink. So we're going to come back to that. But if you preferred Akio to be a real life person in the show, because it is realistic and it is grounded, and his actions towards Utena and Anthy are kind of the heart and soul of the horror of the theme of the show, I totally understand that. And there is a part of that I agree with, that I do like the fact that he is a real character and that he is a dangerous threat and an antagonist. Because let's be real, he's not much of a threat in this movie. He really isn't. But I only think that that's because we've seen the show and we know the alternative, right? I only think because if you watched this movie, I thought about it during the end credits. And at first I was like, oh, well, you could watch this movie instead of the series, but you really can't. You really need to see the series in its entirety before you watch this movie. Because if you watch the series, then you know how Akio is. And this movie, especially as someone, as I've talked about in the discussions with you all, this movie feels like a relief. This movie is like, okay, good. We're not going to, because that was my one fear. When I realized that this was an alternate reality and we were going to go back through some plot points, especially once we had the duel with Saionji, I was like, ooh, are we going to go back through that entire essay incident with Akio in this? And we do, but it has a very different outcome. And it is very different. So on the one hand, I can't believe I'm saying this to you all, but on the one hand, I do prefer Akio in the series because of the threat that he is, and because of how dangerous he is, and because of the constant but for the sake of this movie, what they do with him is so interesting and different, and kind of, look, him getting run over by two naked women on a motorcycle sent me into orbit and made my day. So I will not bash this film because of that, because that's what I wanted in episode 38 and 39. I wanted Utena and Anthy to team up, and we'll talk about it when we get to it. But I was like, so anyway, though, because his influence, he isn't regulating Anthy in the cage. The situation is that Anthy believes that she requires a prince and to do this duty as the Rose Bride, and she doesn't know anything different. And that's kind of, the same in this, but it reaches a point where it becomes different. But what I like about this symbolism is, one, the roses are not all different colors. They're all red for Anthy or red for Accio. And they're all her roses, and they're all everywhere. And I love like the remnants of the bird cage that are just crosses. Amazing. Love it. Love it. Love the whole bit. It's great. So then we have it in the rain. I just love the symbolism of it. And so she's running after to try and find him. So Ikuhara says, for this sequence where Utena is chasing Toga through the school in the rain, we created a number of art boards. Art boards are basically like art designs. We created numerous art designs, and we create the tone of the images for each scene based on the art boards. For example, we originally thought of doing this scene in monotone, but if all of it was monotone, it would be boring. So we came up with the ideas of having pink to the pillars to give it a reddish hue. We had discussions like that with the art staff, and that's how we came up with the art boards or the art design. This is the scene where Toga first appears in the film. We wanted to convey the sense that this character will be appearing quite a bit throughout the film, and also there's a reason why it's raining. What I mean is that in a key scene later on, when she and Toga part ways, there's the sound of a river. We did it like this to make a link between the rain and the flowing water of the river. Oh, I love that. That's great. Yes, and it calls back to, I thought the rain was maybe tied to Anthy and her watering the roses, because then the Prince Rose blooms later on. But I love the idea that it's giving the callback, that it's going to tie back to him and the flood and the water rushing. I also, Toga in all black is kind of like funeral garb in the West. So him being in all black, like this specter of death, he kind of is, right? But yeah, so this opening conversation where she sees him and finds him, and he has the big red rose tied to him. He just looks amazing. I love it. And he's like, oh, the rain will stop soon. It's a capricious passing rain, like Wakaba said. And then when they said, how many years has it been since we last met like this? I remember our promise to go to the planetarium. So when he said that, I thought that this was Utena coming back after several years to find Anthy, and time had changed the Otari Academy, and it was all of this. So, but here's the thing that's so crazy. Could we assume that this might have been... Here's the thing. There's one aspect about this that I'm like, it could be the same timeline. And that's when we find out later on that Accio kills himself, essentially by falling off the balcony. I'm like, after Anthy leaves, he could have done that too and made this all come back full circle. So, it's like, but that aspect there is what threw me for a loop, because I was like, okay, so this is a sequel, but then it's like, no, it's not. And she's like, I didn't come here chasing after you. I just never imagined you'd be in the academy. That should have been a sign that this was taking a different turn. Also, now, oh my God, now it all makes sense. One of the pictures and the paintings from the start that shows up as she's saying, I'd never imagined you'd be in this academy, is of him with the cape on, and in front of them is a boat that's sinking, from the boat scene where he saves her from drowning. Oh my God. Well, that's what it is. There it is. It's like, bitch, it was right in front of you. I was too caught up in the moment to consider that. Also, I like the idea that the roses also with the crosses kind of tie to the church scene. So there's the concept of tying back the church scene to Utena and Toga's meeting, their first encounter in the original series. So I love that. I love that. Also, I love red roses. So just red roses everywhere the imagery was really, it was doing it for me. And then he offers the red rose to her, but she sees the ring and is like, oh, you've been engaged to someone else. And then he says, yeah, the ring is the only reason I'm able to be here. Which, just like Ruka, the ring is tying him to this artificial world, so it is really the only way that he can be there. The movie made sense all along. You just got to figure out and get on the same level with it. And that's what was taking me so long. But oh my God. So yeah. So then amongst the roses, we see the white one blooming, and then it little teardrop gives a ring. So I kind of like that if the white roses were the ones that developed the ring and not necessarily Akio, and then the rose petals start falling from above, which is like a sign that a duel is about to take place. So Ikuhara says, where Utena finds the ring in a blooming rose. This scene here with the rose. There's one white rose among all the red roses. The white rose is the symbol of the prince. And from this lone white rose, Utena receives the ring. In other words, Toga is the prince in Utena's eyes. And when he leaves the scene, a lone white rose, symbolic of the prince, remains, and she receives the ring from the white rose. And just when she receives the ring, Anthy summons Utena from the rose garden into the sky above. It's a very symbolic piece of drama, and it was intended that way. Yeah, that part was really, really good and made complete sense. So in this version, whereas in the show, it is kind of left up to us, the audience, like, was Toga her prince? Was Akio her prince? Was the construct of the prince her prince? You know, in this version, Toga was her prince. But conveniently, he is dead now. So he can't keep being her prince. She has to let him go, and she moves on to Anthy. So... but then also, I liked the idea that the dueling arena is just this giant platform where all these roses are just growing from the cracks in the ground, which is great. But instead of a spiral staircase, like where we're spiraling, it's just a straight shot up. Anthy's architecture is pretty straightforward. The rose garden scene was also very difficult to put to picture. That's because there are only roses. When you put it to picture, it becomes rather bland. I mean, one rose can be drawn quite elaborately. In the image, we have lots of roses. It's quite rich when we describe it in words. But when you actually draw it, it becomes quite bland and monotone. So we worked really hard at creating variation with those images. I totally agree with that. I think the roses look gorgeous and they're so intricately detailed. I love all the red that goes and then the climbing up the stairs to get to the rose garden. I think they did great. It reminds me of, there's a movie... and there's like, she's like naked and she's with all roses around it. It's from the 90s. I'm sure you all know what movie I'm talking about. I can't think of what it is at the moment, but the movie poster is a girl where her naked body is covered by a lot of roses. So yeah. So then Anthy sees Utena for the first time. Anthy looks very different. It was kind of throwing me off at the moment. But then she has the ring. And Anthy gets really worried because she sees the ring and is like, oh no, another duelist has come to try to be the prince. And again, when I first watched the reaction, I was confused because I didn't realize this was a different timeline. This Anthy is not the same Anthy that we knew from the prior one. This Anthy is kind of embraced being the witch and all of the negative connotations that comes with it. And the Anthy from the show was very quiet and submissive. Here, this Anthy is submissive, but she leans in. She leans into the submissive witch aspect of it, which makes her kind of more dangerous, but also more interesting. So we're going to talk about it. But yeah, when she first sees Utena, I love that she tries to stop Utena from taking the ring. That's what I wanted Anthy to do in the original series when she knows how bad it is, but Utena ends up taking it anyway. So I liked the idea that Anthy tried to stop her. And then Utena's like, what are you going? She's like, what are you doing? It's mine. And she's like, how do you know that name, the rose seal? And that's when Saionji shows up. So Ikuhara says, this scene is about Utena and Anthy meeting for the first time. In comparison to the meeting they have in the TV series, it's pretty different. We thought a lot about whether we wanted to create a different sort of impression of their meeting in this scene. In the TV series, she was reluctant and not inclined to initiate the fight. But we changed that in the film. In the film, we created a situation where she would resolve the fight. On the other hand, Utena clearly decides to fight after seeing Anthy, this young girl, get violently abused right in front of her. But more importantly, we wanted to show that Utena's resolve to fight was also based on her long desire to become the prince. I think this aspect of it diverges quite a bit from the TV series. Yeah, so I definitely agree. This definitely takes a much different approach from the TV series. And again, it's kind of apples and oranges, whichever you prefer. I think for the sake of the TV series, the way they originally does it with Utena's character, the way they originally do it, it makes sense because you have a lot of time over several episodes to talk about Utena's character and how it develops, and you can have her kind of change her motivations and resolve as it goes. I mean, the first act of Utena is so good in how they build up questioning why Utena is doing what she's doing, because Utena is not really resigned and resolved in the beginning. She's just like, oh, Anthy's a nice girl, I just want to be a good friend. Here she's very much more resolved and driven right from the get-go, but you've only got an hour and a half to tell a story, so you really can't dilly-dally around. So making Utena be a bit more blunt and to the point works in the favor of the series, especially if you establish it early on with this version of her character. So then we have Saionji showing up, which the only thing one thing is I'm so sad that we went through all of the character work with Saionji in the TV series. And granted, by the end of this movie, it works out. It's fine. He's fine by the end. But we went through all of that development with his character in the TV series. So to see him go right back to the beginning at this point in the movie was like, damn. Remember how much we hated him at the start? Saionji gets no breaks. None whatsoever. I do love right off the bat, there's just literally Utena with her arms wrapped around Anthy, establishing from the beginning their relationship having this physical quality that was not present in the original, except for like very intimate hand-holding, Donmai-esque yearning. Here, it's out in the open, right? So let me see. We get back here where Saionji basically explains like the duelist thing, and then he does the whole stuff. He's a lot more physical with Anthy in this, and she kind of gets thrown around like a rag doll, but at the same time she's a lot more sexual and leans into it, so it's kind of explained more. But Saionji's just again. But here's the thing, Toga's dead, so this version of Saionji really didn't have interactions with Toga. He didn't grow up with Toga letting him ride on the back of his bicycle. It's a different timeline. It's like It's a Wonderful Life. Saionji would just become a toxic jerk without Toga, which is weird. Anyway, Anthy explaining the duel and preparing. Unlike in a TV series where things that are repeated only happen once in a film, there are limits to what you can do in a fight scene shown in a film. In the TV series, getting into a fight in every episode was sort of a trademark of Utena for the fans who watched. But even before the release of the film, there was quite a lot of talk among the fans about how we were going to deal with the fight scenes, and we had to think quite a bit about it. We really had to consider what sort of variation we were going to put into the fight scenes. I can't wait till we get to the discussion about the cars. I can't wait till we get to the discussion about the cars. But I do agree that one thing I was afraid of when I saw this was only an hour and a half is I didn't want it to be a recap movie. And so I was like, ooh, I don't want this to be a recap. I don't want this to be shot for shot, scene for scene, the same thing we saw before. And that's kind of why I love this movie, is because it is so different and it's so unique. And it is so unexpected from what I thought this film was going to do. So, yay. But anyway, so we have Anthy, we had to explain the duel. The duel with Saionji begins. Putting together the picture for this scene was quite difficult. The trick was to work within all the roses in the garden into the fight scene while still having the scene itself focus entirely on the fight. And that was quite tough on our animators. So yeah, we had this duel start out and there's all the roses everywhere. And I did love when Utena putting the ring on at first was like her crossing into the gates of hell. And I was like, no, Utena, don't do it. Didn't you go through this before in a previous life? And maybe she did. But also Anthy like watching her put the ring on and being like, oh my gosh. And then she did. And then I do love the idea of Utena not having a sword. And so they're like, well, how can you fight without a sword? And I love that she grabs literally a broom, like a witch's broom. I was like, ah! So I love the idea because I talked about it in the series where it was the idea of the broom giving like, you know, the broom representing the witch and the witch being women with power and thus being, you know, targeted by men because they're afraid of women being on the same level as them. And so I liked it. We'll go back to the song lyrics at the end of this. I'll look them up. But yeah, Saionji just beating up on her. I was like, I did not like that. I didn't want to see that again, but we all knew it was probably coming. But I love Utena being like, look, Utena just cuts right to the chase of what a lot of the series was focusing on, where she's like, look, no girl's happy being a prize or an object. It's like, it took us a long time to get through that, but you are correct, Utena. And she's like, no girl would be happy with that. And so then I love that reveal of Utena. I guess Utena's hair is wrapped up like Anthy's the entire time. It's not a short haircut, but theoretically, if you had all that hair, it would not be that tightly pressed to your head wrapped up, right? I love her saying, I never said I was a boy. Go, Utena. Good on ya. I love it. And then, though, we have the scene where Anthy, because there's no sword, I love that she says, one may not duel without a sword. I love it. Because Saionji can't attack her as long as Utena doesn't have a weapon. And so then in that moment, Anthy jumps at her. And at first I was a little bit surprised about the kiss, because at first with the kiss, I was like, oh, we're not going to, if this is an alternate timeline, we're not going to build that up in any way. But in a sense, I do like it in hindsight for two reasons. One, because then it shows like Anthy's dress billowing out and it like literally is blooming. Their love is blooming. But two, it establishes right off the bat that their relationship is going to develop and be based in a way that is different than the TV series. So I want to read what Ikuhara says about this. Here, we have them kiss, Anthy and Utena. We had a lot of discussion among the staff about whether we should let them kiss, and opinions were split. There were many that felt that they ought to kiss. In the TV series, we have the characters looking as if they were going to kiss, but they actually never do. Many felt that having them almost kiss, but not quite, was the right way to go. They wondered why the characters would suddenly kiss in the film after all that time not kissing in the TV series. And others felt that they ought to kiss because it's the film version. Well, since it's the film version after all, I guess that's what we went with. Maybe it's just that I wanted to see them kiss. Yeah, I think my thing was in the moment of the reaction, I was like, well, that seems a bit forward since you just met in this timeline, but it does establish a very different foundation of their relationship in this version. And I said it in the reaction, people have been waiting all that time during the TV series for them to kiss and they never did. So we'll just give it to you within the first 20 minutes and then go from there, which is great. So anyway, then we have the rest of the duel that happens between them. And again, like Utena getting fallen upon by Anthy and then the sword coming out and Utena like grabbing it. I like how they animated Utena grabbing the sword. It's like her holding Anthy and looking down at her, but the way that she is, it's almost like in reverence. I love the way that it's done. It's animated beautifully. It looks great. It's gorgeous. And her like pulling the sword out, which again, the idea of her heart being literally stabbed with an object, like with the paint palette knife, like a sword. The symbolism works really good in this movie. So yeah, and then she gets back into her boy shorts with her long hair and dueling uniform, which looks great. And then she just wrecks Saionji's world. So sorry, Saionji. And then we have all the bells. At least Saionji was animated well in this. So then the scene with Utena and Anthy alone. All right. And we see Ikuhara says the scene is set. Oh, in the dorm. We're going to wait till the dorm. I do like that Anthy's dress is like Utena's uniform has the stripes and so does Anthy's dress. And Anthy's dress is a mixture of Utena's and hers, which is great. I love it. Also the dueling arena. One thing that's really cool is on the corner of the dueling arena, you can kind of see it where it's like there's a little line where the roses are not. And there's Saionji over here, and there's Utena and Anthy. It's a cool mirror to later on in the elevator when Toga's over here and Utena's on the other side. Nice. Love it. Yes, please. Give me all that. So then we have, again, the bubbles. The bubbles. connecting to drowning and Toga. Movie, you weren't subtle. I love it. It's great. And the shoe. Oh, and the red shoe. Oh, So then we go to the dorm scene. The scene is set in a school dormitory. So I want to talk about Ikuhara's commentary here. The design of the dorm is, of course, based on the design of the dorm in the TV series. The initial idea was to upgrade the visual images from the TV series. In that sense, a lot of the images you see are based on the design from the TV show and were used as a template in which to work from. In this scene, what we were concerned about was to make the picture into something that looked like a love scene. And we had a lot of discussion with the staff about it. Okay, so we're going to come back to that. We're going to come back to that scene with that here shortly. But yeah, so we get Toga, not Toga, but Utena settling in, all of her clothes there. I like that in Utena's clothing, there are like dresses and like girly clothes, but then there's also a skirt and then there's also like a sweater. So it's like, I like that it establishes that Utena is not always going to be dressed up as this male presenting character, that she does have some femininity to her. I like that. Also, the little portrait of her and Toga as kids, I was like, oh, that was the first time I was like, oh, this is a different timeline. And it's like of the prince and the stars and everything. Love it. And that's when Anthy comes in. And I like that we went from the bunk bed where Anthy was spying on Utena for Akio and keeping her in check to the one bed fanfic trope, but Anthy tries to like lure Utena to the bed and kind of gets her. And the way that it's illustrated, the sheets with all the vast wrinkles, we'll go back to that with Shiori and Toga in the white room, but it's kind of reminiscent of that, of the white couch with Akio, all of that. So I want to hear what Ikuhara says about it. In this scene, what we were concerned about in the scene was to make the picture into something that looked like a love scene. And we had a lot of discussion with the staff about it. In other words, we'd have the characters talk about what happened during the day, like the fight in the afternoon, or about making the secrets of the college they were attending. But talking from a visual point of view, we wanted to make the mood like that of two lovers. You can hear the sound of the fastener there. Yep, something being unzipped. I heard that in the reaction. Between 22 minutes in and 22. This sound was put there by the sound effects engineer who decided to put it there on his own without direction from me. It seemed kind of funny, so we thought to just leave it there. So that wasn't intentional at the beginning? Oh, okay. Well, that makes more sense now because when I heard that sound, it was during the discussion and Utena's kind of off-put by how sexual Anthy is from the start. And she's like, whoa, we just met. Why are you throwing yourself out there to men like this? That's not cool. And the zipper sound kind of reminded me of Akio and all the scenes with him and Toga in the original series. But then when Utena stood up, her pants weren't undone or anything like that. So it was like, so did anything happen? But the fact that the sound designer just put that in, oh my God. But yeah, I think at this point, I was a little bit, what I liked about this scene is that immediately Anthy's character is totally different, where she talks about how she kind of leans into the whole like promiscuous girl thing that people suspect of her, and she leans into it in this world. And Utena kind of calls her out and says, hey, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. And are you like this with everybody? And how do you think I should feel about that? And I love in this movie that they talk about it, that they have a conversation about it, and that they both kind of have moments of vulnerability and calling each other out. Like they did that in the actual TV show, but it kind of felt sometimes like it was beating around the bush. And here they're like, nope, we're just going to cut straight to the point. And I was like, okay, cool. And again, you only have an hour left after this to get through the movie. So you kind of need to cut to the point. So I thought it was really well done. And then Toga and them talk about how Utena and Anthy are weird. The girl who wears Prince's clothes. So then we go to the White Room. I want to hear Ikuhara's commentary before we start this. Shiori and Toga talking in the White Room. In this scene, as a change in mood, the idea was to create a world in which there are no colors. Oh, with all the white sheets. So things are rather blank. Of course, the sheet that's covering Toga is like a shroud that you would use to cover the deceased. Oh my God! Oh, that's so true! The space in which the characters Toga and Shiori exist, we intended to represent as a world in which the dead people reside, like the entrance to the world of the deceased. Also, in terms of sound effects, we even brought in sounds from the lobby of a hospital. In other words, the reason that Shiori is with Toga is because we wanted to convey the sense that Shiori is the one who is haunted by the dead. Oh, that's so freaking cool. Okay. Nice. Okay. Wow, that adds a whole nother dimension to it because I wasn't even thinking about the shroud. Wow. But yeah, oh my God, when you move out of a house or if somebody's died, they put sheets over all the furniture and items as they're going through, like an autopsy. Oh my God, that's so true. Oh, well, yeah. And she's at the desk. And then she's like, that reminds me, I used to have a prince myself. And then the shroud comes off of Toga in the chair. Oh, it's so cool. Yes. So Shiori talks about having a prince. Shiori talks about having a prince herself. And I want to go back. My poor mouth, my poor microphone. She's like, but that prince is dead. And then she says, a childhood friend of mine killed him. Now, at that point, I thought she was talking about Ruka, which she very well could be. So then it shows Juri by the river and says the prince liked her. Oh, wow. And now it's the two of them on the desk, and she's like poking her pencil in there. So one time when she fell off a boat, he dove in and was swept away trying to save her. Oh, so in this story, Juri, her prince was Toga. But Toga saved Juri and died. And now she can't be. So her prince was the same with Toga. And Toga ended up being Utena's prince as well. That's so weird. What a small world. Toga's just out here being everybody's prince. Yep. Uh-huh. Because she's like picking around in the ear there. I'm like, don't pick with the dead person's ear. Oh my God. She's like, it's so stupid. We were just about to be alone. Ah, but the prince died instead. And she like blows it over and then, so I'll never forgive her. And then we have the idea of Juri kind of being like Anthy in that moment of people not forgiving. And we see the broken picture with her portrait there. Interesting. Okay. I'll make her play the prince for the rest of her life. Instead. That's kind of crazy. And then we see the glub glub, the bubbles. So Shiori, because Juri was saved by him, she's going to try to extract her revenge and make Juri be a prince instead. Which is kind of like her making Utena be a prince instead as well. Shiori is the secret villain of this arc, which is crazy. So wild. So then, from that moment, we go to the pool cleaning scene, where everybody's cleaning the pool, and Ikuhara says, the scene here, we wanted to create a picture that conveyed a sense of an aquatic world. There's a swimming pool, but no water. The pool is built into an arcade that's made of mirrors. So even though there's no water in the pool, we wanted to create an image of coolness through visual effects. In Japan, we have a custom where people who are practicing in their respective sports teams at clubs at high schools and such would cry out in unison or make uniform movements to help team solidarity. That's what this scene shows. Interesting. So yeah, it basically has everybody working together to make this scene. And so it shows them later on, everybody's cleaning up the pool. And then we have Wakaba fighting with the one girl. And then we have Anthy there. And everybody's in like the very cool uniforms. And so Toga walks up. And he's like, oh, so you're a duelist now. And then they have a conversation about, and they bring Anthy forward. And Toga's like, well, why do you think people are all after Anthy? She's really attractive. And of course, Utena looks down at the ring, being like, so this ring is what led you to the academy. The promise of eternity, right? And so then Utena asks if Toga is after Anthy, which is, he says, well, you could say that, but it's really more of like what Anthy's bringing to the table, which is the chance for him to get to the castle, right? And of course, Utena's like, well, have you been with Anthy? And of course, Toga won't answer that question, right? But anyway, so Anthy's brought back up and Utena's like, well, I don't have any need for the Rose Bride, But Toga says, even though this prince has just won you, which, just won you, gross, no thank you. Mm-mm. And then the hose snapping and spraying water everywhere felt very sexual. It felt very phallic, of like clear liquids being sprayed by a hose. I mean, you know. And so then, if you're by the pool, you're bound to get wet. Mm-hmm. And so then we have the phone conversation. Why did my little sister imprison the Rose Prince? So, Shiori and Toga, the phone call and the flashback story sequence. Again, this scene shows the world of Shiori and Toga. It represents the world of the deceased. In other words, she's in this world because of a phone call she received from Akio. We thought that was interesting. Of course, the Akio character died quite a long time ago, so the conversation between Toga and Akio is like a conversation between ghosts. We thought it would be interesting to add Shiori to the picture in these scenes. Oh my god! Okay! So Akio is in fact a ghost throughout all of this, as one would expect. But I thought that it was interesting that the whole thing is, it's literally just two ghosts talking on the phone in this dead house while Shiori is painting her nails. And at one point, she's like having this euphoric, looks like an orgasm, while she's like watching these ghosts talk and having her nails painted, but crazy. I did like the fact that they redid the whole scene of Anthy protecting the prince. They redid it. The roses are pink in the storyboard, but they gave it like a movie budget, and it shows it. What's interesting is it shows Anthy in this version. In this version, during the scene, Anthy is in the same princess uniform, the princess dress that Utena was at the start of the show, versus her being in the witch outfit in the shed. So it's definitely told from a different perspective, and the clothing changes. So it's cool to see how the differences in the views of the two sequences kind of change the meaning of it a little bit. I like that. But it's still the same thing. They ask for the prince to be given back, and they call her a witch, even though she's in a princess uniform. And they're like, yes, my sister really was a witch. She had magical powers. But there was another secret. And it shows him collapsing, and they're like, what was that? And he says, the Rose Prince was actually the Lord of the Flies. So I think that's interesting. I don't know what the Lord of the Flies. I wonder if anybody else has gotten a meaning of that. If anybody else has referenced that. If anybody referenced that, I don't exactly know, because Lord of the Flies, that movie, what is that movie about? In an overall summary. I did not get a chance to read Lord of the Flies. It's about a group of British boys who are stranded on an uninhabited island and their disastrous attempts to govern themselves. Let me see if I can find anything about the overall themes. About morality, civility, leadership, and society all explore the duality of human nature. Which I guess the duality of human nature, the idea of the desire for civilization conflicts with the desire for power. I like that, because that kind of ties back to the whole thing in the series where Akio was splitting in two, where he was trying to be the noble prince, but at the same time, he was trying to get power. So like we talked about in the intro with that comment, that directly reflects on the theme of Lord of the Flies. So that's probably why that was said, that that's what he was. That makes a lot more sense. Interesting. But it establishes he also is dead. My sister used her magic to change him into a prince. And then there's like the clothes and the heart shape. And when my sister's magic faded, that's when the prince returned to his true self. So now Akio is stating over the phone that because of Anthy bewitching him, it made him think he could be a prince. But then once the magic faded off, he returned back to himself, which we know as the audience, it's like, well, that's kind of bullshit. You can use that as an excuse, but no, you weren't bewitched by her. That's like when men that assault women say, oh, well, she was asking for it, or that's exactly what it's saying. And it's like, no, That's kind of bullshit on your part, Akio. So to regain the lost magical power, you devised this game to get the power back. And then Toga's like, well, I'll be the one to gain the power in the end. And then we see the prince pulling the sword from Anthy. And that's what Toga wants. Okay. Okay. So, all right. Then we have the bathtub scene. Yes. So, this scene. Kozu and Mickey in the bathtub. This scene is, well, this is a clawfoot bathtub. The manga artist, Chiho Saito, actually has a clawfoot bathtub. We use that as the model. It looks a lot like Mr. Saito's bath at her home. That's all you're gonna give us, you bitch? That's all you're gonna give us on this weird-ass scene? How dare you? Because, yeah, it was a weird scene. They're like, I know you're doing things behind my back. And they're like, don't move. And so, yeah, Cher and Mickey are there, and she's like trimming up his... She's using a razor to trim his eyebrows. Girl, use tweezers. Why you got a freaking razor? And then he's like, well, we can't return to the garden where we were together. But you'll always be precious to me. And then she gets mad at that and says, quit messing around. And she like rips the sheets and holds the blade to her throat, to Mickey's throat, and says, you're a traitor. And that's the scene. It feels like it's summarizing their entire arc in just that one scene, but also it was not necessary. I didn't need an incestuous scene with Mickey and Kozu at all, but at least it's not the scene that we're going to get next. So, or we have a scene before that. So anyway, the gate opens up and we have Utena looking out and seeing Anthy walking away from their dorm. So Utena, one thing I really like is that Utena follows Anthy in this version. In the OG version, and I'm running out of space, in the TV series, Utena's just kind of oblivious and a himbo and is like, I don't know where Anthy's going, but I'm not going to follow her because reasons. I like in this version, Utena's like, no, I want to find out what she's doing. That's kind of suspicious. I'm going to follow her, see where she goes. And to be fair to Utena, Anthy is not as sneaky in this movie as she is in the TV show because Anthy's more worried about Akio in the TV show, and Anthy doesn't have a lot to worry about in this except for herself. So then we have the scene where Toga talks about his past. When I was a child, I grew out my hair as instructed by my father. And he said that's what was the customer wanted. So there's a sex scene between Shiori and Toga. Was not on my bingo card for Utena. But we established Toga having this backstory that was not present in the original TV series. And that backstory is that Toga was sold and literally human trafficked to another man. Ikuhara, I'm ready to hear about why we did this, but it says, my new father, I was sold. And so then we show him going to the house, and this man is creepy as sin that takes up there to him as he shows up as a kid. And he's like, I lost many things, but thanks to that, I was able to partake in the Academy's dueling game. And then I liked the idea of this, like, all of the sheets contracting within themselves, which was crazy. So he's like, I know you'll win. You won't lose to someone like Juri. So I like the phone's off the hook during this scene. Like, she's like, all the sheets are going, and like, because she's gross. She doesn't think anyone knows, but I saw it. So I guess Shiori is calling her gross because of Juri liking women, I suppose. The man chasing Toga, not necessary. She always wears a pendant, doesn't she? She has my photo in the locket. So they cut to the drawing on Toga's back first. So I want to come back to that. But it says Toga running through the cabbage patch. Well, I guess we should talk about them both together, but I want to get through this scene first before I hear Ikuhara's commentary. Yeah, she stares at it while she's by herself. I do not know why we had to have an SA scene with Toga as a kid, if that was our way to make Toga sympathetic, but why it was necessary. And then we had the caterpillars that came on the back of the cabbage that became Shiori with the now granted, the imagery of the bed sheets or the shrouds of death coming out of Shiori's back as she's like posed nude is insane, and the visual is really good, but also like it is wild. And then somebody was, who spread the rumor about her, and it seems like it was Shiori. I mean, the imagery is very Evangelion as well, and them all being the moths on the cabbages. So win the duel and punish Jury, please. And then there's the image of Toga when he looks up and that man's there and he's looking at the moths. No, thank you. And then Toga, of course, says, you know, I would win the duel. That's fine, but I'm not going to be cruel to Jury. Because she says, you know, punish Jury for loving her. And he's like, I don't know. What does he say there? Toga goes, I intend to win the duel, but I can't be cruel to Jury. Which is so wild. And she says, why? And then he's, a duelist aspire to higher principles, which is what Utena told him. So Utena's had that impact on him, right? And she looks, and then we see the drawing that has like the umbilical cord coming off of it. So Shiori drawing on Toga's back. This scene is actually quite a significant one for Shiori and Toga. Basically, two things are expressed here. First, you have the idea that the place where Shiori and Toga live is the world of the dead. We get some background here on Toga's childhood there. Toga's childhood was sort of a nightmare. So, you have Toga talk about his nightmarish childhood, and you also have Shiori's malicious feelings towards the world in which she lives. These two themes intersect here. So in this world of the dead, in which Toga and Shiori exist, Shiori's malicious feelings and Toga's nightmarish childhood come together visually. So it's this creepy alligator scissors. So basically, talking about Toga's nightmarish childhood is an understatement of the century, and Shiori being malicious about the fact that she lives in a world where she has to deal with her own feelings, and the fact that they kind of go against society, and Jury feels the same way and all that fun stuff. Then we have Toga running through the cabbage patch. And you have the scene in the cabbage patch where a beautiful butterfly appears, and the meaning of this, Shiori's malicious feelings and Toga's sad past here, are, how can I say, brought together and grow together. They join and come together as one force of evil. We tried to make this scene quite beautiful, and in that sense, we put a lot of effort into it. In Utena, we wanted to express negative beauty as well as positive beauty throughout. In that sense, this scene is one where we wanted to convey the sadness of a negative beauty. Yeah. I've talked about this back around episode 34, and I kind of will, this is the only scene of the movie that I will really stand by as, I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and this is probably hopefully the last time I have to watch it and say it, but SA, I don't know if I like SA used as a beautiful art form. Especially, and I know some people in the comments have said, well, you don't know if Ikuhara and his team of writers have had that experience or not. I honestly don't. But the way that I read this commentary, no offense, but it comes across as being from someone who has not had that experience. Because I can't imagine, even as a writer, because in the writings that I've done, even if I've thought about including assault as a plot point, the inclusion of it isn't to be art. The inclusion of it is to reflect a horrifying situation that needs and demands attention about it, or it's a societal point that needs to be addressed, because I feel like there's a political implication behind it, because it is. It's an act against a body. And there is a political implication with that. And to just say that we just wanted it to be this beautiful expression of artwork, to make this evil have this symbolic stylism to it, I feel does a little bit of a disservice if you've experienced that your pain and trauma is an art form. I don't know. And I know that's not necessarily what they intended, but the commentary itself, I don't think we needed to see an adult man undress a young child boy on screen to that extent. Not because later on in the story, it doesn't have any impact, right? You didn't need this scene to get across the idea that Toga saved the drowning kid. My point is Toga getting sexually assaulted as a child doesn't necessarily impact the decision he makes to save Juri or the decision he makes that causes him to drown, right? It's not really influencing any of that. It was just a stylistic choice. So because it doesn't impact Toga's character later on, I don't think you needed it. I think you could have erased that part of the scene and it would have had no impact on the overall message of the story, is what I'm saying. It just, when you do something like SA for the sake of just doing it without any lingering or lasting implication, like some of the SA in the rest of the story was, then in the original series, then that's where I'm kind of like, but we're done with that scene. Luckily, it's 30 minutes in and then we're done with it. So that's good. So that's how we get there. Then we go to the garage. The fact that it's a car garage, the fact that we find out it's a car garage is insane, is wild. I am reeling. So the car garage with Mickey, Juri, and Shiori. This scene is set in the basement. It's a basement garage. There are many cars stored in this place, and we show this because later we see many of these cars come out. Here we have a car that's called Kozu, and many of our fans have asked us if Kozu has been turned into a car. Well, if you ask, I suppose that's it. As for why she became a car, well, let's see. It's the same reason that Utena becomes a car. But I'd really rather not talk about it because that would narrow the interpretation of the story. When Shiori appears and speaks to Juri. In a sense, the Shiori character has an important meaning to Juri's character. To Juri, Shiori is a reminder of her past trauma. Later, we realize that Juri had a traumatic experience as a child when she let a man die as he drowned in a river. The one who was in love with the man who dies was Shiori. So the reason Juri puts on a tough and brave attitude is because she let this man die. So in front of Shiori, she puts on a brave attitude in order to appease her guilt. So the drama with Juri. But yeah, so Kozu became a car in the end. I guess because she loves Mickey. The same reason, I guess, that Utena and Shiori become cars. So interesting. I thought it was interesting that we saw the little the ghost of the prince for a hot second. I thought that was good. This whole car thing was wild. And then, of course, we saw when Mickey was talking about the rubber duck. That was crazy too, because Juri's like, I want power so I can be free of everything, free of her guilt, of letting the man that Shiori loved die, which is kind of connected to Ruka as well in the OG series. And then Mickey, they're like, why would you want power, Mickey? And then it cuts back to him looking at the rubber duck. The only thing that was weird about Juri in this entire movie was her hitting on Mickey. Because I was like, is Juri bisexual too? It's like, what? That was the only part that I was like, I don't know how that works. But then Shiori shows up. Like, Juri seemed out of character when she was hitting on Mickey, but that's just me. Luckily, it was just like a hot second scene, and then Shiori shows up. And then she's like, oh, I wanted to see you, Juri. And then her with the ring, she's like, you're a duelist. She's like, I know about Utena, that one girl. She likes Toga. And that's why she's so insistent on cross-dressing, so she could become a duelist. Is it wrong for someone like that to get that power? And of course, Juri and them are like, yeah, no, she's kind of a joke, so we can't let that happen to her. And then in that moment, Mickey's like, well, who's Toga? I was like, but yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy when you realize you're like, oh shit, is Toga a ghost? Ha-ha! So then we cut to the rose garden at night before the dance. This scene was also quite difficult. That is, just trying to draw those roses in the black background. It was hard to film beautifully. It was somewhat unfortunate. Here they're talking about stars and about how they like to watch the stars together, but since Toga's not there, we thought it would be interesting to draw a night sky without stars. We wanted to show the sky with no stars at all, so we made it completely black. I honestly, once the pipe breaks, which we'll talk about here in a second, that animation, oh, it's gorgeous. So one thing that I really love is that when we get to the rooftop, and Utena confronts Anthy, it is very similar to the rooftop confrontation in episode 37, which I was like, we fast forwarded through 99% of the duels. 90% of the duels we fast forwarded through. We only saved Saionji and Utena and Juri and Utena, which honestly, two of the better duels. And I mean, the Saionji duel is like the first one, so it's iconic. And the Juri duel is one of my favorites with Utena. But yeah, and then we cut to the discussion with Anthy and her. So at this point, I also love the animation of when they drew Anthy's feet curling over the ledge. That part was crazy. Crazy, y'all. So yeah, drawing her with her feet over the edge. So then we have her look back, and there's Utena showing up. And I like that she has made the whole dueling arena where she's growing her roses instead of down. What I liked about this movie was that because the prince is dead and because Anthy is completely, leaned into the witch persona, that she's kind of at the top of the tower. She's the one at the top of the dueling arena, controlling all the things, and Utena confronts her about it, right? She's like, why are you here this late? And I kind of, when you think about it, Akio's not here, so Anthy functioning as just feeling guilty and her functioning by herself with it is really crazy. But she says, this late, you mean you're tending to your roses? She's like, well, I am the rose bride. And then Utena's like, well, I don't like any of that. I like Utena grabbing the lantern or the water pail and like grabbing it and taking it away from her. Because Utena's like, well, are you going to be sexual with anybody who wins the duel? And I like that Anthy calls her out and says, do you care what I do with anybody else or mainly the guy that you like? And that's when Utena grabs the watering can and shoves it away and then says, what do you know? What do you know about me? I like Utena makes her answer and says, was it you? Toga acted strange because of you. Was it you? I love it. It's like, and then so Utena has to grapple with why her friend is acting so weird, why he's here after all this time and acting different, and she doesn't know who to blame, so she confronts Anthy about it. And I don't like her shoving Anthy down, because I'm like, well, this isn't all Anthy's fault. But I do like this scene in a sense that we actually get Utena and Anthy talking back and forth and cutting through the bullshit and getting to the heart of the matter. I really like it. And then Utena kind of breaks down and shows her vulnerability, saying, I thought he'd be here beside me. He was there when my parents died or went away. I thought he'd always be by my side and no one else's. So I will say this, Anthy gets up in ways during this scene that are kind of very sexual and kind of almost animalistic, which is just like, ugh. And then they talk about the stars, saying there is no prince. And then I love when Anthy has her hand thumbing through Utena's hair, saying there's no prince. Because Toga's dead. And, well, she doesn't know Toga's dead yet, but she's like, Toga's not who I thought he was. And these people are treating you horribly, Anthy, and that's not cool. And so it's like, how could there be a prince whenever this is what's happening? And at that moment, when Anthy went and got the axe, she points it in the same direction as Utena, and I was like, what is happening? But then she breaks the pipe so that the water can, overflow the roses in that moment. The sequence is gorgeous. The sequence with the roses and everything in the stars, incredible. Some of the best imagery I've seen in the entire show. So, commentary about Anthy breaking the pipe and spilling out the roses. This sequence here is totally done digitally. It may look like regular animation from here to the dance sequence, but it's completely digital. We used animation software called 3D Works in this sequence and created these 2D character images with that. It was a quite tricky scene to do. There's a good resolution in the picture, especially in the background scene. There's good detail. Unfortunately, in the video, it's hard to appreciate the detail, but I think you'd notice the beauty of the scene if you were to see it on the big screen. So the lighting does change in this, and that is so true. So I could definitely see that, but that shot of Utena in the water with the stars reflected in the sky and all of the roses, it's beautiful. Beautiful. And then when she sees him and Mia, and him and Mia's like, look, you wanted to see the stars. You wanted to go to the planetarium with Toga, but now he's a ghost. Don't worry. I'll bring you the stars. Like, and I love that symbolism all connecting together. It's great. I love it. It works so well. And then we get to like the dance scene with them, where it shows her with like the long hair and the dueling uniform, and then she has the dress bloom. And we have this dance sequence. The dance sequence is one of the highlights of the film. I think this scene is one of the most beautifully done, and our staff did their best to make the scene as beautiful as possible. We used 3D graphics for this scene. It's a digital scene, so we used computer graphics, of course, but we found that hardly anyone could tell that this was digitally done, which means there's a warmth to the image. Usually, computer graphic images tend to be harsh and cold, so I was happy that this turned out all right. I especially like this scene very much. I've done dance scenes like this in my career before, like with Sailor Moon. You could say I'm particularly good at doing these kind of scenes. Yeah, so in the reaction, this was like kind of the turning point for me in the reaction, because up until this point, I had been so confused about what this movie was doing and what route we were going across and why Utena was in love with Toga. But after this point, I was like, okay. I was like, if this is a total new story, new storyline, and these are these two characters, which that shot of the two of them dancing in their regular clothes, but the image we see in the water is the illusion of what they imagine and their true selves. Love. Love. So yeah, I think the dance scene is really well done. I love it. It looks so good with all the rose blossoms and everything. It's like, we wanted this. This is what we wanted the whole time. This is what we wanted from the series. And they were like, oh, you just gotta wait till the movie to get it. Mm-hmm. That's really what it was. You just had to wait till the movie to get a scene like this. And I'm like, okay, all right. And then they get together. It is absolutely wild. I love it. So then they're doing an art project. Like, the dance scene is just so good. So good. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate it as much in the reaction, but it's awesome. So then we have the art scene. We have to get the essence of someone. We see the Onion Knight with Wakaba, and everybody sends them. There's all the different busts and molds, like from the TV series, in the background, and they send them up to draw, and Utena and her like walk to the top of the tower. So there's this boy who's talking to Wakaba here that never actually shows his face on screen anywhere. He's actually a rather symbolic character. What I mean is that Wakaba originally considered Utena as her prince. But, how can I say? When another boy shows up, she'll make him her boyfriend. In other words, Utena lives in quite a special world, whereas we wanted to show that Wakaba lives a rather ordinary life. So in a sense, this boy represents another Utena to her, but on a more ordinary level. Oh, okay. So Onion Knight gets to be Wakaba's prince. Well, there you go. Or Wakaba's Utena, rather. There you go. I really like the idea of Utena following Anthy up to the top of the tower. I thought that going up to the top of the tower, I really liked it because it was kind of like, it was a great representation of a couple things. One, they get in the elevator, which is a direct reference like to the elevator to go up to the dueling arena that's actually the tower. So I liked that construct there. But I also like the fact that it's all open, whereas in the past, Utena has been led up to the top of the tower by, either illusions or unsuspecting means. But here, Anthy literally leads her up there just blatantly. There's no tricks, no lies, just follow me to the top of the tower and here we are. And that's it. So we get up there. Okay. So, and she's like, no one comes up here, which is a sign that Akio's dead, right? And then I love the plane, like, searing by. And then when they look at the top of the tower, One thing that I really love is, again, you want to contrast to the TV show. It's like when they're at the top of the tower looking out the window at night at the stars, it's all like doomy and despairing. But here, because it's in a polar opposite, different timeline, they're both looking directly out the window together on the same wavelength. It's the middle of broad daylight and it's sunshine, and it's a completely different vibe. Absolutely love it. So then we have the sketch sequence. And so we had the sketching scene where Anthy reveals her stab wound. So it's not that her heart is gone, like I thought it was really doing. It's the fact that she has the stab wound. So this, one of the things we talked to the art department a lot about for the project was the idea of using the color red in a symbolic way in the images. For that, we thought really hard about how we could represent the color red. This scene here is one example. The chairman's office has a red carpet and red drapes. This is the observatory, which was previously used as the chairman's office. Even the shadows in this scene have tinges of red to them. The scene was meant to show how much closer Utena and Anthy have become after the earlier dance scene. Both of these characters tended to hide a lot from each other in their relationship from the very beginning. Utena has her past with Toga, and Anthy, of course, has her past with the chairman, her brother. They live together in the same room without opening up to each other about these things. The scene is intended to show how the two try to bring their spirits closer together. In the original script, this scene was to show a scar on Anthy's chest that she got from an injury at the hands of her brother. But personally, I really didn't like the idea of showing a scar on her chest in terms of the picture, and I tried to think of another way to depict this. That is, without showing it clearly in the picture, but rather in another way. So we decided to use a silhouette like you see here. I thought that showing it as a silhouette was suited to Utena, and because it's shown as a silhouette, not only does it show the injury she got, but also the injury to her spirit as expressed through the rest of her body. I think it was a good idea, and it turned out very nicely. Yeah, I thought her whole heart was gone, to go with the surrealism, but I think it does work out really good. Another thing I really liked as well was the fact of like how this goes. They actually have a conversation and they talk about it, and Utena apologizes, and she's like, here's why, was the way I was last night, just so that I was tossing my feelings. Also, I like the idea of behind Anthy is the curtains, like the stage. So like the chairman in the original TV series, and the bench and the chairs like in Mikage's, studio, like all of the elements are there. And I love that. I think it's great. And she's like, well, and Anthy tries to brush it off and says, well, you're my betrothed. It's what I would do. But Utena's like, you need to stop saying that. Like, I'm your friend. We're not going to duel anymore. Let's talk as friends. And the moment that she throws the ring off and Anthy's eyes kind of go, oh. And Anthy's like, well, do you like me? And she's like, it's not that I don't like you. It's that I want to be friends and we're going to be close. So let's do it the right way. I got back to my room last night when I was alone and I felt better. After, I wondered if talking about our problems and helping each other when we were in trouble is something that simple is exactly what we needed. And I was like, yes, yes, it is. I'm glad you realized it. Yes, absolutely. I love it. And she's like, I want to be your friend. We shouldn't keep secrets from each other like the Rose Bride. And when she asked Anthy to tell her about herself, that's when they switch. And she's like, actually, let's switch. And then what I thought was really interesting was because Utena is naked in this scene, it's because Utena just bared her soul and bared herself out to Anthy, being like, I've stripped myself down so that you can see all of me, but you don't want to do the same? Like, I thought we were on the same playing field. She's like, I thought we were capturing each other's essence as per the assignment. Let's not keep secrets. And so that's when Anthy goes, okay. She's like, fine. She's like, if I'm the only one modeling, it's not fair. I also love the idea that there's something so sexual about this scene because Utena's like all hot and bothered and like panting and naked. And it's very much the idea of the two of us are having this sexual encounter, but we need to both be vulnerable. And I like that that Anthy's like, okay, I'm going to make myself vulnerable to you, but are you sure you're ready to see this? And then we see all the portraits of Anthy and everything that's happened to her. Like we see her with the roses surrounding her and the girls being jealous. We see the prince and the castle. We see the prince falling from the castle, which now makes more sense. And then we see all these other images of the prince and her. And then all the model and all the pictures are her. And everyone wants the Rose Bride. And we see Akio with the red hot pants. And then we see her with the stab wound. Okay, I want to know what this Nanami cow sequence is. I have to know. Thank God we have a paragraph of it from Ukuhara. This cow is the same one that appeared in the TV series. For people who know the character, we put it in for their amusement. For those who don't, we thought it would serve as a nice little break. I believe this is Nanami the cow character that came out in episode 16 of the TV series. In the film, we don't have a character called Nanami. So we put this cow character in instead. The character we have on the left here is called Karapon, the red thing. Karapon is the creepy red thing. He's like a rival to the character of Choo Choo. Oh my God! In the TV series, Choo Choo didn't have anyone to play off of. We thought he was kind of lonely, so we created someone for him. Rather than a rival, he's more of a nemesis. Choo Choo always ends up getting eaten. We thought of many episodes where Choo Choo would always end up getting bitten. So they just basically were like, Nanami has no point in being here in this series, in this movie, because of the different timeline. So we'll just put her in as the cow in the other videotape and call it a day. That's so mean. That's so cruel. How dare they? Poor Nanami. Justice for Nanami. I never thought I would say that, but justice for Nanami. Also, this Karapon, creepy as shit. No, thank you. Choo Choo is adorable. You let Choo Choo be here next to this alligator, this scissoring alligator. I also love the Shadow Girls are like, now for the real scandalous tape. So, Akio flashback with Kane in the taxi cab. The Japanese musician Mitsuhiko Oikawa did the voice of this Akio character. In Japan, he's quite popular, and how can I say his stage persona as a rock star is like that of a prince in visual terms, so he's really well suited to the character. I thought it was quite funny that this character would take taxis and such. Interesting. So I like the fact they got a different voice actor to play Akio for the movie because it is a different timeline. Also, this Akio very much presents himself as like the model for Adam. It's kind of creepy with him doing the thing over the hood and everything, and has all the butlers and dances around with Kane and has the car and everything, but ends up taking the taxi. But I mean, the scene where he basically roofies the drink of Anthy to knock her out and assault her is so on the nose. And they're like, that's the secret of the Rose Bride if you didn't get it from the TV show. But yeah. Anyway, I do like the idea that for the duel between Utena and Juri, they just cut to her taking the sword out of Anthy. Like, their relationship is developed in such a different, but yet more cohesive way by this point. It's kind of crazy. So this is where Juri duels Utena. Of course, they're dueling in this scene because of Utena's relationship with Anthy. And Juri is fighting on behalf of Shiori. And Shiori's feelings are based on her delusion of Toga. In other words, Shiori's feelings are like that of a ghost. When you come right down to it, Shiori is a character that's possessed by a ghost. We wrote Shiori as a negative character. She's very self-conscious about being possessed by ghosts, but she's also not one who would actually do anything about it herself. Of course, Anthy's like that too. Anthy is also quite self-conscious about being possessed by a ghost, but Shiori expresses that in a far more negative way. So Juri, who is linked to Shiori, is also possessed by a ghost. Oh my God! We thought we would develop her as one who is possessed by Toga, who had died in the past. I thought that would be an interesting idea to explore. The Juri character is quite popular among Utena fans in Japan, and I like her very much as well. In some aspects, she is very similar in character to Utena, so she plays off of Utena quite a lot. You could say we developed her character specifically to play against Utena. I kind of believe that because even in the TV show, she was kind of like, she always felt like the anchor that was trying to remind Utena, being like, okay, now you say that, but what about this? And she always kind of held Utena accountable and made sure that Utena understood, you know, like, okay, but did you think about it this way? Like, it always felt like Juri was holding her accountable and making her aware that what she was doing was coming across a certain way. But the idea of them all being possessed by the ghosts of the prince and everything in this scene is actually really, really funny. I love the people watching the duel, and I love the duel being on the catwalk. That's so clever. I thought that that was just really, really well done. And then Mickey's hair's grown out in this scene, and Toga's standing right there. It's great. And then the Anthy's there too, and Shiori's there as well. These two women possessed by the ghosts of princes. All that. And then Juri kind of chides at Utena. The rose seal doesn't suit you. Was that all you had, oh prince? So one thing that was interesting was that when Utena gains the kind of persona of the prince, she literally embodies it and looks like him, which I thought was an interesting twist. Also, one thing that's really cool is that when you get back to looking at Anthy with the dress on, she actually has a pair of pants and the dress goes over it. I think that's really cool. Love that. But yeah, she goes past Juri, ends up winning the duel. We all know how that works. And then we have the Shadow Girls coming in. I cannot believe of them digging up the corpse from the corpse being buried in the rose garden. Oh my God. Loved that. That was like the hole that it was dug in. It looks like a vagina coming out. The fact that it was over the roses. The fact that his body was growing the red roses. So at first I thought he was coming back like going to be in the movie more as like a resurrected Akio, and I was like, no, but I'm glad the way that they ended up going about it. The sequence with the Shadow Playgirls and Shiori revealing Akio's corpse. In this film, we have Girl E and Girl F. These girls are only in the film version because we also have Girl C. This Girl C was actually also in the TV series. As to why we brought Girl C to the film from the TV series, there's an episode in the TV series where it becomes apparent that Girl C was once a monkey. I always enjoyed that character, so I included her in the film because I thought it'd be interesting to have a monkey that pretends to be a human doing some commentary. That tells us nothing about the corpse. Bitch. I thought this sequence was amazing. I was like, oh my God. The fact of Kane like screaming with the body getting dug up. Oh my God. And she's got like the gardening uniform on. Insane. And so then, of course, you could see there where Shiori is blaming Anthy for killing the chairman, which is just crazy because Akio technically killed himself after he stabbed Anthy. So then we have the video where they play it and Utena goes up to find Anthy and we see the flashback. The video flashback of Akio stabbing Anthy. We designed this scene to make it look very metaphysical. It depicts a mysterious world of images in which the truth is gradually revealed. As for the issue at heart, it is Anthy's secret. In other words, the kind of relationship she had with her brother in the past and the secret she's hiding. And also what Anthy is trying to hide about her brother's death. These are all conveyed to the audience, of course. So just as the story is revealed to the audience, it is also being revealed to Utena. As for what's at the end of this revelation of a past that Utena had forgotten, as for what's at the end of this is the revelation of a past that Utena had forgotten and was hiding. So the fact that Anthy was aware and conscious of everything that Akio was doing and him being like, oh, well, I'm not like that. And he's like, you know, I need the key to the car to get out of here and all this. And I can't, you know, and then literally going back to this scene where he freaks out and he's like, did you always pretend to just be asleep? So it's like Akio dealing with his guilt in that moment that she's been aware of everything that he's been doing. And he's like, oh, don't worry. She says, you're my prince, big brother. You can do with me as you please. And he's like, don't say that, which is kind of like what Utena has realized about the prince persona. She's like, just because I'm a prince doesn't mean I can do anything to you. That's not right. And then he says, I'm not like that, which is kind of how Utena has felt about Anthy in this whole time. I love the idea of all the doors being open and it's like Nemuro Hall. Every door is open and you keep following them. It's great. The imagery was wonderful. And the reception booth and everything and the do not enter sign and the arrows, all of it was so well done. I loved this chase scene to the top of the tower. And the elevator. And he's looking for the key. He says, I can't find the key. And she's like, what are you talking about? He says, a car without its key can't move. It's doomed to rust. So he literally, it's the idea that he can't find the key to the car, the key to get out. And when Anthy looks at him as he's like freaking out in this moment, when he and he's destroying everything, when she looks up and says, well, calm down. You're the prince. You can do whatever you wish. That literally was like me in the episode being like, if you're the one in control like you think you are, you can help her if you want to. You don't have to not help her. There's no way it's her fault. And so it's not her fault you lost the key. And then at that point, he holds her down and he stabs her. And he says, you don't understand. And that's when he stabs her with the knife. But then after he stabs her, he reveals behind the blanket, the window, and he stumbles and falls out of it to his death. So it's like that short sequence of everything that happened in that scene is literally concluding everything from the TV show in a tiny little segment, which is absolutely wild. Absolutely wild. So then we have the tape fizzling out, like that's the end of the tape, and Utena gets to the elevator. So it says, Utena approaching the elevator. The visuals in this scene are generally based on the design of the Memorial Hall that you see after episode 14 in the second TV series. The Memorial Hall was was quite popular among fans. They liked the visuals very much, so we decided to include it in the film as well. The elevator visual technique is something we used a number of times in the second season. We decided to use those visuals again for the film. And in the elevator, we have Utena play against Toga, where she declares her love for him. This is only in the film, and I think it's quite interesting. Throughout the mysterious and metaphysical imagery that we use to set up this point, we reveal the secret that Anthy kept. And it culminates in this elevator scene where Utena declares her love. Here, the nature of the relationship between Utena and Toga, which had been held in tension throughout the story, is finally revealed. So yeah, I thought it was interesting that we actually get in this timeline Utena loving Toga, because it's not really a thing in the original series. Like, do I think that Toga cared about Utena in the original series? Yes, I do. Do I think that Utena loved Toga? No, I don't. I think she humored him like before the end, but this version of Toga and Utena is very different from the TV series. But I thought it was interesting where the moment they started talking about the person drowning and connecting all the dots, I was like, oh, he's a ghost because he does the ghost head tilt that Mikage does throughout that series and that sequence. Okay. So, the boy drowning in the lake and elevator sequence. Fans ask about this scene quite a bit. They want to know who is on the boat in that scene. If the ones on the bench are Utena and Toga when they were children, then who is the girl on the boat? That's Juri, right? Since the girl who fell into the river drowned, Toga also died. Oh, since the girl who fell into the river drowned, Toga also died when he tried to save her. Actually, the girl who was on the boat was Juri. But we didn't do a close-up of Juri as a child, so people were guessing quite a bit as to who it was. Many thought that perhaps it was Shiori. In this film, in addition to roses, water also was used as a very important motif. When Toga and Utena meet, it is raining, and there's the scene by the empty swimming pool. And of course, there's a scene in the rose garden in the sky where the two dance in the water. As for why we use these motifs throughout, it was all for this scene. Toga is a character that had actually drowned as a child. He actually was a ghost that Utena and Shiori had a number of others see. He actually died a long time ago and only exists in the dreams of Utena and Shiori. Just like Shiori, Utena is also drawn into this world of the dead. But Utena clearly decides that she won't be joining him in this world, and so they part ways in this scene. Right, so I guess Juri, it says, the girl fell into the river drowned, Toga, and also died when he tried to save her. Oh, I guess, is it suggesting that Juri dies in this as well and that she's a ghost? Are they all ghosts? But yeah, I like the idea that it shows that I did like the fact that Utena decided in the elevator scene that she, even though she loved Toga, she was going to let the past go and move on. And now she wants to help Anthy, who's in the present. Right? and she's going to move on from him, which is great. So the scene where he like goes away from her was actually really sad. I was like, damn. And the imagery where the water like leads him away. Oh, it was great. Toga floating away from the elevator. Toga may be a ghost himself, but he still loves Utena even now. This is the parting scene upon which many audiences have remarked. Mrs. Saito says this is her favorite scene. I do like that scene a lot. I did, even though I, in the original series, did not ship Toga and Utena, I thought it was kind of a cool twist that they did like each other here, and our bisexual himbo gets to say goodbye to his ghostness. I thought this was actually kind of cool, though, because in the thing with Ruka and Juri, it's kind of the same deal. But Ruka and Juri, they had a goodbye, but I like this goodbye kind of better. It's romantic, and it was satisfying. Okay. So then we have Utena getting to the top of the peak with Anthy. Oh my god. Oh my god. Now, granted, what I love is once she gets to the top with Anthy, and Anthy's like, what are we gonna do now? Because Akio is not there to orchestrate this elaborate bullshit, Utena's like, hey, I've settled my past with Toga. Got that taken care of. Let's leave. This world's weird. Let's go. And so I'm like, yes, absolutely you should go. That's great that you've decided to do these things. And then before they can get any further, they're like, I like the idea that Anthy's like, you've reached the top of the tower. You're the one that's won all the duels. You get to be the new Akio and control everything. And Utena's like, no. I don't want to be the prince. I don't want to be a prince. I want you and I to get out of here because this world and this whole prince thing isn't up to code. And I'm like, amazing. So you think they're going to go somewhere. And just as they're about to go away, that's when she gets thrown into a car wash. And let me tell you, the first line that Ikuhara says is, some of our fans took issue with this car wash scene. Okay. You don't say. Ugh. There were a lot of differing opinions among the staff about this one as well. There were many that definitely didn't want to do this scene, but I wanted to make the film special. And because it's a film, I wanted to express things that I'd only do in film. Normally in a dramatic action film, in the climax of this type of film, the protagonist would normally be faced against some super strong evil opponent or alien with superhuman powers. And visually, you'd normally see these intense images. But we've seen things like that before, so how can I say? I myself wasn't really interested. There are lots of shows like that already, so I wanted to create a spectacular scene that was unique to this film. So I came up with this scene. This scene shows the changing of the outward look of Otari Academy. And after this, all the images of the setting that you've seen until now disappear completely. Yeah, this, like, the animation style, everything, I was like, oh, this is wild. This is absolutely wild. And it just, the whole thing with the car, okay. So, anyway, then Utena shows up and Anthy sees Utena as the car. And it says, Anthy finds the Utena car. Many ask why Utena ends up being turned into a car. I try not to answer that. I mentioned this before, but the reason I don't want to answer this is because I feel it would limit the meaning of the story and make it less interesting. Perfect. I'll say one thing that was on my mind, though. Let's see. There's a story of Sleeping Beauty, where you have the princess who'd been asleep for a long time who's awakened by the prince. But the Utena character has been the prince from the beginning of this story. So the idea of Utena being turned into a car suggests that she's being put to sleep. So I thought that it would be interesting to reverse the roles played by Utena and Anthy in their respective relationships. In other words, Utena is the one who becomes the princess. She's the one forced into sleep. And only Anthy can free Utena from this sleep. And that's how things come to an end. I thought it would be a very interesting way to reverse their roles. Honestly, this is the part of the movie that won me over, that made me go, okay. Because it was so batshit crazy. I was like, one, it's completely bonkers. I'm all in. Because at this point, it's like, you had to do something. Let's make it a race car scene. But the thing that got me was that what I liked about it was Utena has, throughout the entire series, been about her trying to achieve this role as a prince to save Anthy. But throughout the series, we established that Anthy needs to save herself. At the end of the day, she needs to be the one to overcome Akio and overcome the struggles that she's faced with. So what got me with this scene was that you took Utena and put her in a role where her and Anthy have to work together, quote unquote. But then, on top of it, Anthy has to be the driver. Anthy has to be the one to drive the car, to switch the ignition, Anthy has to be the one to initiate things. She has to be the one to drive through and save everyone. And that's Anthy's job. And Anthy gets to take ownership for herself. She has to have her self-respect. She gets to work on behalf of herself to save Utena that she loves. Like, that's what I wanted from episodes 38 and 39, were for Anthy to go from being the victim to being the victor. Because if you are a victim of stuff like what she's gone through, that's what you want. You don't want to stay the victim. You want to be able to have that moment where you take ownership and fly past. And I know in the series, she gets that at the end when she walks away from the academy. But it just kind of felt like at the end of the series, like, I don't want to say a pity move, but it felt like okay, Anthy, you've been through a lot. Now you can leave. It felt like one of those moments. It didn't feel earned. Like here, Anthy's like, no, I'm going to do this. And it kind of matches her character fine. And it shows that her and Utena's relationship is developed enough where they work together to go past Akio and the prince concept at the end. And that's what I wanted. So I didn't expect it to come in the form of a race car sequence, but I'll take it. I was like, yes. So I was all here for it. And then we got this bitchin' drag car with the two horses that are like the different engines. And she's like, okay, I guess I'll get inside of you. And I love how the key is Anthy's love. Anthy's love and willpower is what drives the car. And I love it. And I love that they take off together into this race car sequence. So the race sequence with the Shadow Playgirls covering it as a newscast. The people who were keen on the production of this film, based on the TV series, never thought it would end with these mechanical action scenes. They were quite surprised when the film came out. I actually wanted to surprise them. That's why I made the climax like this. This scene was quite a heavy scene to do from a production standpoint and point of view. It was a difficult one. In addition to the mechanical aspects, the scene itself moves very quickly. They're also driving cars, so everything is moving very quickly to a more of an action-oriented scene. It was also quite difficult to do from a production standpoint. In particular, from the operator room scene to the ending credits, some people may notice the music never lets up. The climax goes on for 20 minutes. So the music continues for 20 minutes. And since the music is synchronized with the picture and visual images, the music recording was quite a difficult process. Yeah, I didn't realize it, but yeah, the music doesn't stop. That is wild. From a visual standpoint, it's full of hard, action-packed images. But since we have the music playing for 20 minutes straight, how can I say I wanted to make it a bit more of a musical, like an old Hollywood musical? In order to do an action scene like this, we gathered many animators that specialize in such work. But initially, these people didn't think that they'd hear from us about the project. So when we contacted them about this film, they were kind of surprised and wondered why we were calling them. When we showed them the storyboard, they understood what we were talking about and why they were called. Even they were quite surprised that we'd have such a climax like this in the film. Normally, when they do animation shows that feature robots and such, their involvement is much more generalized. It's usually the theme of the whole show, and they tend to feel somewhat lost in the overall picture. But in this project, how can I say, each animator had his or her own bit in which they could show off their own area of expertise. For example, an animator that specializes in doing girl shows can really bring out the best in the dance scene, while mecha action experts can do this for climax scenes like this one here. So in that sense, the different types of scenes are clearly distinguished in the film, allowing each animator's focus on his or her area of expertise. And I think the result turned out very nicely. And I think the work of each expert is well expressed throughout the film. I love it. I thought this scene was insane. The fact that Shiori becomes a car, the fact that there's Utena and Anthy's everywhere and they're all like looking over, the fact that the sex drive thing is brought back in this weird new way, and the idea of the theme of there being roads and creating new roads, and the whole chase sequence was amazing. I loved it. Like, Shuri crashing and blowing up is insane, though. And then the fact that all these other cars start to go along, and that they all started to like confront them and confound them at the very end, and that Utena keeps getting beat up. Utena, the way that she was getting beat up over and over again in the scene reminded me of like literally episode 39, where Utena was like just beaten to a pulp, and then Anthy ends up falling away from her anyway. Which, by the way, if all of this is an illusion and not really a dueling arena, did Anthy really fall out the building, or did she just like collapse 5 feet away from Utena and Utena just got knocked unconscious? Which one was it? But I do like the way that it connected back to this. And just when you think that they're not going to be able to escape, I love that the classmates saved them. Like, they're like, don't worry, we're going to get out as well. You just keep going and we'll make it out next time around too. Like, that's kind of what I wanted from the series, was for the classmates to do, the other student council members to do something to help and not just stand there and let everything go down. So I'm glad that actually went through in this. That's great. But then we get the castle. Also, Wakaba turned into a Jeep. So there's that. Beep, beep. Insane. And higher principles attract good company. I like that Saionji makes this little statement being like, oh, I'll get outside to seduce you. And Anthy's like, yeah, okay. Sure thing, Saionji. Poor Saionji, now that he doesn't have Toga, who's he going to hit on? Watch out, Mickey. Your sister's a car now, so I don't know how that's going to work. But anyway, so then the castle shows up, which the moment the castle ascended, it reminded me of, because we said Sega was like one of the companies tied to this movie. If you've ever played Sonic the Hedgehog like 2 on the Sega, or Sonic the Hedgehog 3, anytime like Robotnik shows up as the final boss, like the giant egg-shaped like battle station that he's riding comes out of the sky, it felt just like a final boss from a Sega Sonic game, and I was living. So, where the castle ascends from the nearby highway, we are very careful with this scene. What I mean is that we put a lot of effort into making this scene where the castle rises up. We put a lot of effort into making it huge and beautiful as well. Not just huge, but also beautiful. In order to do that, we used a lot of effects on the visuals that you don't see at all earlier in the film. One thing we did try to avoid was using flashy effects from the previous scene, so we kept it fairly dark for over 10 minutes. And when the castle finally appears, there's the strong impact of its visual image. From here on, the shape of the car changes. And the music you hear is the opening theme song from the TV series, as sort of a symbol from the show. Yes, that was such a good point. I love that part of the show. It was great. This is actually quite a dangerous situation going on here. Driving through the moving wheels under the castle, but we present it as kind of a video game that the faceless girls here are monitoring. By showing these girls observing the action, I thought it'd be interesting to give that same impression to the audience, in which they were watching the scene as if watching a game. This scene here would be quite hard to understand, but we use computer graphics here as well. Okay, and so then they get, before Akio makes his appearance. Yeah, it just, the fact that they get through and just smash through and make it to Akio, I loved it. And I love that it's Anthy, when the song from the TV show kicks in, it's Anthy being like, no, we're gonna leave. We're gonna go together. And I was like, yes, good, that's exactly what I wanted. I love it. And so then we get to Akio at the very end, the final boss, as they're getting smashed. And here the other ghost-like character, Akio, makes his appearance. This is actually a very significant scene. Throughout the story, Utena claimed to be the prince, but the real princes are Toga, who was courageous and righteous in his attempt to save a drowning girl, and Akio, Anthy's kind and loving brother. In this world, the real princes are dead. I thought it was interesting to create a fantastic world where a girl plays the part of a prince, since there are no true princes remaining in that world. The meaning of this I can't really say in one word, but one way to look at it is that I wanted to convey the sense of what it means to become an adult. In other words, there are no people with pure hearts in the world of adults. So, what would you do when you realize this? In other words, when you realize that the world of adults is a very dirty one, where no one with a pure heart can live, would you avoid it and remain as a child where you can live in a world of childish and beautiful dreams? Or would you enter the adult world regardless, even if you knew that it was not a pure world? So which are you going to choose? That's what's being expressed in the climax of this film. And yeah, and granted, I get what they're saying by there's no pure hearts in the adult world. I don't think that all adults are filthy, dirty heathens that want to assault children. Obviously. And I don't think the show is making that statement as well, but it's making a statement that we, as we grow up, we have a choice. We can either, stay oblivious and naive and possibly be taken advantage of because other people will likely do that, or we can take that step into adulthood and try to make it better to where the world is not just filled with filthy people, but that we can acclimate into that adult world and realize what's in front of us. And for Utena and Anthy, I feel like Utena and Anthy moving past Akio is a way in which they enter that adult world, because Akio tells them to stay in the child world, and Anthy's like, nope. She's like, even if we die, even if we end up separating, it's our free will and we're going to move past. And Akio thinks he's going to trap both of them there, and he tries to. But I just love Anthy working with Utena in that moment, taking the power to revolutionize the world and just blowing past him on the motorcycle naked. I just loved it. I was like, yes, blow past him, say goodbye, Akio, just knock him to the side, hit and run. It's everything that I wanted. And I feel like both of them, arm in arm, nude together on a motorcycle, is their rite of passage into adulthood together, and that they're going to just take it and go. So, the straw shadow play girls, as we go through here. Yep. I love the castle disappearing, and then we see the girls are all made of straw. Here we show the names of the faceless girls to reveal their identities. They were simply dolls and not robots or humans. 2 of the dolls have the names Utena and Anthy on them. What's meant by this is that the faceless girls were another expression of Utena and Anthy's souls. Oh, also, they represent the audience and the feelings expressed by the audience. The idea of the story is to express the way that a teenage audience would feel. Oh, I love that. Okay, so I like the idea that they're not... I said they were different versions of Anthy and Utena from other timelines, but I like the idea that they're an audience surrogate, but they're also like it's kind of like Inside Out with Anthy and Utena. It's kind of like what they feel inside, and kind of like the representations of that. Okay. But then we have like Mad Max Fury Road, like with Utena and Anthy nude on a motorcycle. I mean, Akio and Saionji get erotic motorcycle rides. Why can't we have Utena and Anthy naked straddling a motorcycle together? That's like the sexiest Yuri thing I've ever seen in my life. So the scene with Utena and Anthy naked on the motorcycle thingy. This scene is set where you would see endless piles of scrap metal and cars. It's a desolate wilderness. This wilderness, of course, is an expression of the modern world we live in. In this sense, the collegiate world is like a dream world. It's a dream world in which we see Disneyland. So the idea was to compare this dream world with that of desolate wilderness, the adult world outside. The wilderness is a large, expansive place, but a complicated one. I wanted to show how they would dare to enter this world with nothing, where nothing. So it's like they've left the one world of like fantasy behind, and they're walking into the adult world just like bearing their souls naked as a jaybird. Many ask why I made the last scene like this. As for why, I myself really don't know. But I suppose it has to do with how I used to look at the world and society when I was a teenager. And that's reflected here. These are probably the sort of visual images I had in my teens. That is, the adult world is not pure, and anyone with a pure heart would not be able to live in an adult world. So if that's the case, I felt that I didn't want to become an adult. But then I wondered if it was okay taking it to that degree. I'm not sure. In that sense, the last scene was meant to honestly reflect the true feelings I had when I was in my teens. So that's the kind of scene I want young teenagers to see before they head off into society. There's a part of me that still thinks that I'm living here in a desolate adult wilderness. That's really sad, honestly. So I think I made the last scene like that for my own benefit as well. For example, I'm an animation director now. I think it's a very complicated work being an animation director. What I mean is that I'm not working for myself, and there's a lot of work dealing with other people involved. So the staffing work can be quite heavy. Also, you're undertaking these projects after getting a lot of money together, so there's a serious business angle to it as well. So to accomplish this task and remain faithful to yourself, at the same time, this type of animation work can really test a person. So you could say that I really strove to accomplish that in the last scene, given the world that I live in. In other words, I have to go forward in this complex world and face these complicated situations. Of course, I approached the last scene as from the audience's point of view, but I also approached it from the perspective of my teen years as well from my present perspective. In that sense, I'd have to say that this last scene expresses my situation back then much more than anything else I've done. And to hear people tell me how they liked the last scene makes me happy. I honestly, so basically in a roundabout way, I liked the hopeful quality of this, that you have these two women, all they've got is like a motorcycle and a dream, nothing on their backs but each other, and I just love that they're like, we're gonna go in this world hand in hand, and we have each other, and whether it lasts or not, we'll see, and just them kissing and embracing each other at the end was just, that's what I wanted. That's honestly what I wanted. And I was like, I know I bitched the entire series about like, give me moments where I will root for Utena and Anthy. This is what I needed. This is it. This is what I needed. You needed me to have a racing scene with them on the back of a motorcycle. And Utena turning into a car. So apparently that's what it took. But I love that. I love that so much. And then we have the end credits after that. Like, good for them. Good for them. They lived happily ever after. And finally, we have quite a great number of names in the list of end credits. We all worked very hard together on this, and they put their hearts into this project. I'll take this opportunity to thank them all right here. Thank you. And also, to all you fans out there who've been listening to my commentary, thank you very much. I look forward to bringing the next project to you in the future. Thank you very much. Yeah! So, holy shit, I talked about this for 2 hours. Ah! So, yeah. If you're still here, this was great. This made up for episode 39. It really did. I loved this movie. It was great. I still have the manga next week to go through, the After the Revolution, which now I'm really curious about, but I really liked this movie and everything it did. It took me a minute to get into it, but once I did, I was like, oh, I'm on board now. So I honestly think that after this movie, I would root for Utena and Anthy. I would. I'm really happy about that. So yeah. In any case, I'm excited to hear your comments down below and what you all thought of this movie as well. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah! Next week we'll go over the After the Revolution manga and talk a little bit more about Revolutionary Girl Utena. Bye!